ethnomusicology, you would find that he can have and can find some associated literature with of course, the help of his supervisors and us. But in terms of the history and the roots of carnival, of course, we have a lot of writings on that now. And your literature review is not only confined to a book. And I would reference students I helped last year, like what's her name? Marie. Marie was doing carnival and she was doing her band. And I said, but Marie, that's not a thesis. What about your band? We have to know. What is it? What's the thesis about it? And then I came across the notion of her band being a band that is on the environment, carnival and the environment, and boom, bright spark. So we got a lot of stuff. I pulled down a lot of things for her from the newspapers and so on, which is also literature review, right? And the rest is history with that. Everybody was thrilled. They're inviting her to do her PhD and so on and so on. And therefore, you will not probably find something written in the language that you're writing it, but there'll be associated material on it. Similarly, Dave, he was doing something with the all-inclusive fets, and you'd find a snippet here and a snippet there and so on. So you put things together. This woman, Gilbert, or whatever her name is, would have written on the music, the songs, that sort of thing, in the carnival. So, or, you know, the ethnomusicology aspect of the music. This afternoon, Prof asked me, because I shared with you all Lizelli's work when she had done her thesis on African naming and naming practices. Well, what she did, she just didn't do, well, the African name the children and call them, well, she has one, Lizelli or Kwame and that sort of thing. She, Kristen, if you would just pull the screen to the beginning of her thesis for me. I know it'd be starting with the literature review, but I will tell you. Right. So her thesis is African names and naming practices. The impact slavery and European domination had on the African psyche, identity, and protest. So it's not just say, well, the African name, it was a thesis that investigated what the impact of slavery and European colonization, domination, etc., would have had on the African psyche by taking away their naming practices. What they did to their identity. So then you have now to investigate what is in this name that was so integral to an African, what the names meant to an African. And we would know through vicariously or otherwise that when an African child is named, it is ceremonial, it has meaning. It can mean anything that will take that child to its future destiny. So when you get transposed and transported into the quote unquote new world, they take away that from you. So you are disconnected with that essence of your being. And this is what her thesis explored. Now, I should tell you that this was done since 2012, and it's not even a doctoral thesis, but you would see the effort that she took into crafting her literature review. And a lot of students feel, well, this is a master's, man. For her doctoral work, it meant looking at 300 books. I'm not too sure how many she explored for this. But as Prof does it, we would go through the work paragraph by paragraph and see how you can identify with what she has done and how you can adapt that sort of methodology in doing your literature review to reduce your hardship. Chris, can you just take us down to the beginning, of course?
Sorry, to the start of the lit review?
Yeah, lit review now. That's where we are. And I think I would now impart Prof's blessings on the class and this afternoon's work. So who wants to read it for us? At least the first part. Any takers?
Must have one idiot here.
Go ahead.
The first study is centered on the oral traditions of Calypso. Striking at the heart of my study on African names and naming, and the impact European domination had on the African psyche, is a contribution by a Calypso artist of Trinidad and Tobago, the late Cecil Hume, whose sobriquet was the maestro. Well respected for his insightfulness as a modern day griot, the maestro immortalized in his signature song, Black Identity, a berating of the denigration of Africans by stripping them of their names and true mark of identity.
Okay, so let me take a little credit there. I mean, and there's no secret that Griselli bounced off a lot of stuff from me and ideas. And obviously, my association with the Calypso, I took her to this Calypso where she unraveled that whole construct of what a name means, and when you hear a name, what it will mean. So go ahead, Neil. Anybody knows the Calypso? I guess people would know the Calypso. I'm sure Jackie knows this Calypso. Croco had redone it. Neil?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead.
Quote, the first thing is that a shame African people with European name.
Just now, Neil. Folks, just remember that even if it is not well put together in terms of a proper sentence, remember this is how the Calypsonian would have sung it at the time. So it's really the excerpt from the song. And so if Neil is having a little issue in how it is constructed, it is because that's the Calypso. Another thing too, that this work was done in the Chicago style. So you would see some issues of citation that might not be aligned to the MLE. So ignore that, all the footnotes. And so that's Chicago because their university did Chicago. So sorry about that, Neil. I just thought I should help you out there by saying that, you know, it's okay if you don't read it right. Go ahead.
Okay. The first thing that is a shame, African people with European name.
Very good.
If you hear Sicharan, Ramkilawan, Lalchan, Balchan, well, bet your life that is a East Indian man. Jose, Juan, Gonzalez, Miguel, Sanchez, Pablo, you're sure them fellas from Mexico. So why my name couldn't be in jazz? What's how I say that?
Well, and Jaka, which you would see that he has included there. I think I probably did that. It's a satire. This is a Calypsonian satire on the local Black country. Right? That's not part of the song. So when you see something is in a bracket that is a square bracket, that is when something is not in the citation or the quotation. That is what you would have inserted. So you put it not in a curly bracket, but a square bracket. Okay, go ahead.
So why my name couldn't be Injak?
Injaka.
Injaka.
Right.
Lumumba, Mekiba, or Kenyatta. If we use these names, then we're sure to be on the stairway to Black identity. Now, some people will walk around. Now, some people walk around in Dashiki. Some preach Ashanti, some Swati.
Swahili.
Sorry?
Swahili.
That's Swahili? Okay, sorry. I hear it again. Some people will walk around in that Dashiki. Some preach Ashanti, some Swahili. But when them dead, go and look on the tombstones. It's Patterson, Atkinson, Jackson, and Calhoun. That is counterfeitry identity.
Counterfeit identity.
Sorry, that is counterfeit identity. These people must be lost in world history. My show back at the 1990th century.
So there's another part of that clip, so I hope we didn't quote that, but it talk about why the mighty chalk dust does not change his name to Pygmy Bus. Then we will know he's serious about Black identity. I hope I hope Prof does not see that in this piece that she did there, but it's all part of the calypso pick on with each other. Of course, Chalky is a short man, and pygmies are known to be short people. So they say why he didn't change his name from Chalk Dust to Pygmy Bus, and then we know he's serious about true Black identity. Go ahead.
He really Black conscious.
Miss,
it's right. Right. Yes, Neil.
One second. Aliza just asked me to send him the link for the class. Can I just take a second to do that?
Yeah. Or let Kristen do it. I don't know.
Hey, Kristen, I can't send it for him because I got in through Zoom. Oh, unless I do it from here.
So while Neil is doing that,
I decided anyway to know. Don't worry about that.
okay. Okay. So what you all see here is that you can use a calypso, and by calypso stories are told. So there are many calypsos on the subjects that you are doing, and therefore if you can use those calypsos. Neil, and you remember what I told you about your own as well, where we have calypso rows and these people doing stuff that you can cite, and what's her name, singing Sandra and so on. Okay, so you all see the link there with the naming. Anybody want to say anything about that? Jackie?
Yes, ma'am. Hello?
That
I am not hearing you.
Kristen, is there anything that is wrong with my system?
Something wrong with mine for sure. God,
No, Jackie having trouble hearing, huh?
not seeing anything. Something went in my computer. All sorts of X's and all sorts of things came up on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going off and coming back on.
Lovely.
Right.
What about another student? Alicia, are you okay? Any comments on that piece of thing there?
I just seen a new format. I have heard of this format before, but I have never actually seen a sample.
What do you mean about format? What do you mean?
Well, using a calypso or some kind of song or poem in a thesis to identify the topic. So
you'll be very happy to know that the work that I'm doing with yours right now would have used one. The one I used for you was Rhythm of a People.
Okay.
But I haven't got time. It's crazy the amount of things that I'm doing at the same time, including Fusias, but you will get yours by tomorrow, or later tonight. But I use Rhythm of a People. Okay. All right, so let's move on quickly. In this particular song, who's reading? Neil?
In this particular song, the Calypso bard made clever reference to different ethnicities and their easy recognition based on indigenous names.
I'm not seeing Chris. Carry it up a bit.
Quite.
My phone. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Quite unlike the African man and woman. Incidentally, the roots of Calypso have been traced back to Africa, from where it was transposed and transformed.
Okay, go ahead.
Transposed and transformed on the plantations of the Caribbean during slavery. The Calypso was the calypso was not only used by the enslaved Africans to heap scorn on their slave masters and to lament their own dreadful life, but it also mirrored the society. As a result of slavery and European domination, the Africans were largely debarred from their inalienable rights to their ethnic and ancestral African identity. Fundamentally, a denial to the sanctity and honor in retaining their own names as a mark of distinction, similar to all the other ethnicities.
Okay, stop right there. So here it is. The reader is, in fact, she's done this in the US. Okay, it was done at the Ohio State University, which incidentally, after 150 years, she had been their first PhD in African and African American studies in a university with an intake of about 60,000 students. So she created history for the university and her country. But just as what Prof keeps saying all the time, when you pick up the work, anybody from wherever you are will be able to understand the story. So right away, she gives you a little indication of the calypso, the calypsonian, the tracing back, who this person sang this thing. So you don't even have to worry. You're getting a nice little story in her literature review. Go ahead, Neil.
Excuse me, some question. Hello?
Yeah, Dwayne, go ahead.
Miss, so even if you have those information in the introduction, you will still need it in the literature review?
Well, the thing about it, if you notice, her introduction is not very long, you know. You can decide what you're doing. Now, remember, she worked with this segment of her lit review. She used a calypso. Now, she would not have spoken about a calypso in the introduction, but the fact that she introduced a calypso, she had to say what a calypso was, where it came from. And this guy sang the calypso from Trinidad. Good? Obviously, she would not have mentioned that in the introduction because she did not use a calypso. Remember, her name is African name, is not. Okay, so let me tell you, this literature review is a sample of a literature review, but not for Carnival Studies or not for Trinidad and Tobago. It is for her African American and African Studies Masters. And then she moved on to the PhD. So she's doing if it's anything she could be using is African American literature review, because that's a central aspect of her work in the United States for African Americans, and a thesis on African naming and how the colonials. So a lot of people don't realize that America was also colonized. And that was a big the War of Independence. The same people that colonize us colonize America. Okay, and then of course they carried on with the enslavement, which was brutal right up until in the 1960s. You still had segregation, even today with the Black Lives Matter movement. So it was very brutal for them. So her work is really, the centrality of her work is not in Trinidad and Calypso and Carnival. It is in the United States and what they experienced and endured through slavery, through enslavement, and the taking away of their names in their context. But because she's a Caribbean person and a Trinidadian, Trinidad and Tobago nationality, she was able to show them, hey, look, just like you all, we also lost our names and identity. And here it is, we have a Calypsonian of the land of my birth. She always reminds them that she's born in Trinidad. The land of my birth can actually sing on this. You all probably may have a song like that, but you don't. And this is the genius of our Calypsonian and our culture and our ethnomusicology, that we can mirror enslavement through song and dance and music and carnival, which other people don't have. And when you did that in the roots of Trinidad Carnival, why it's so rooted and why it's so different from other places, all of that come into play, that whole acculturation, that bringing out indigenous art forms, the backyards and all those things. Is that clearer, Dwayne?
Yes, Miss, thanks, I understand.
Yeah, you sure? Do tell me yes and you understand.
Yes, remember, but in respect to us, we wouldn't need an in-depth background in our literature review because we would already have that in our introduction.
Well,
but we would still need some form of identification as well.
Yeah, well, because well, it's no secret now, but I just told Alicia, when I use her rhythm of the people, I use it in the introduction, right? And the same way that, well, she's not on to literature reviewers yet. That whatever books that she uses for literature review, she'll deal with that. But the fact that I use rhythm of a people in her introduction, I was able then to show then how it aligns with the creativity and the design that she's talking about in her thesis. Because she's dealing with design and creativity and Peter Minshall and blah, blah, blah. So here it is now, you have this calypso that, there are lots of calypsos that talk about our creativity, but I just thought Rhythm of a People helped because it says our creativity is unsurpassed, design, fashion, and that's the link. You always have to link your work, link your work, link your work, okay? So you're dealing with, what is your thesis? Something with the children and steel band. Good.
Yes.
So if you could find, like I would think there would be calypsos on the steel band. Sparrow has one that you can use that. The steel band of da 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 da, and this other thing is in my head. So, but there are calypsos that you can sing on the steel. And this guy has a lot. Lord Kitchen, not Maestro, Lord Kitchen. Every calypsonian sang on the steel band.
So,
go ahead. I'm hearing somebody else.
Mrs. Sorry, I don't know why I'm mouth.
It's all right. You can call me Anna to Fitzy.
Mrs. Fitzpatrick, so what you're saying is that we have an added advantage, and also because it is arts and carnival studies, we should utilize that unique feature that we have in terms of the whole catalog of calypsos going back from whenever to help to make our case.
I think wherever you have an advantage, use it. You should see my thesis. My thesis is littered with calypsos, littered with, virtually littered. I talk all about this thing, don't stop the carnival, which is the thing now, everybody talking with the COVID. But actually, you know that my class sometimes starts with calypso, where I talk about this exercise that I give you all with the, help me.
Merchant.
Like Pan in Danger and all these things, and the research methods thing with people wanted the carnival, but they didn't do the natural science research. They wanted the cultural research, and then the rainwash or the damask, because they did not factor in the rainy season. How could you have carnival and the rainy season washing away everything? Carnival is usually held in the dry season, but then again, you have Lent, you can't have carnival in Lent, and all the other social factors, right? And then, but the rest of the year is rainy season. Half of the year is the dry season, but that half of the year was taken up with the polio story. And then by the time the polio story finished, it was Lent, which is another 40 days and 40 nights. And the time I finished with that is rain from June. So when are you going to have the carnival? Which is something now they're trying to consider whether it is they should defer it till later on. You might end up with a washed out carnival again. But then people play mud mask. That is all. Depends on how you want to showcase your carnival.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for being so late. Annette, I said we could call her, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, we could use any literature where like any poem from anywhere, any song from anywhere, as in the example that they give us.
So what you can do in a case like that, if it's unpublished work or a student's work or somebody work, you can probably say that it's unpublished, but it relates to your work in this way and so on, because you're looking at what is written on this subject. Good. So if something I would imagine that song would have its public, Neil, that song would have been published in its own right. So you could look at that as a publication because it would have been out there.
It's published, yes, yeah. So author, publisher.
That's right. So it would have been published. Okay, let's go ahead. And then we could raise more points down the road.
My early observation of the popular discourse and literature on African names and naming is that the focus of the study centered on indigenous meanings of names and naming practices on the continent. African cultural practices are steeped in spiritualism, where names are sacred to the people and their very being. Indeed, names and naming among African peoples on the continent bore spiritual, psychological, and physical significance. Literary documents such as 1001 African Names, First and Last Names of the African Continent by Julia Stewart, offered substantive evidence on African indigenous names and naming practices that have survived periods of European invasion and colonialism on the African continent. These studies also provided a reference of African names, naming practices, and meanings for those persons of African descent on the continent and throughout the diaspora. Sorry?
No, tell him, Krista. You know what? Let me just, they have to carry up the screen. Yeah, go ahead.
Right.
These studies, she has a footnote. She has footnote 3.
Yeah, sure.
Now, this is something, Alicia, pay attention, because she's doing the Chicago style and not the MLA. She's free to use those footnotes. MLA discourages footnotes except if it's like explaining a one word, but everything's supposed to be in the body of the document. I guess what she uses footnotes for, by and large, it would be something like how we do the work cited at the end. So those things are sometimes there, but you can't put that there. So just ignore that aspect of the work. Okay? These studies also provide
a reference for African names, naming practices, and meanings for those persons of African descent on the continent and throughout the diaspora, who are interested in asserting and reclaiming their African identity, as well as those who may wish to pass down the practice of naming to their offspring.
Right. So here it is now. We've moved away from the calypso because that was just a nice little intro. But she's actually now citing somebody who did 1001 African names, first and last names from the continent by Julia Stewart. And she's saying what Julia Stewart had done. So now we would see then that Julia Stewart did that, but she's offering substantive evidence on African indigenous names and naming practices that have survived periods of European invasion and colonialism on the African continent. Let's see what her footnote says. What is that footnote about? Let's look at the footnote. Chrisan?
Yeah, footnote 3? Which footnote?
So you see, what she basically did was, at the footnote, she just said where it was taken from, which I told you we don't do in MLA. So this is also a lesson on what not to do in MLA because she's using the Chicago format. We would have that as where would we have that, Adisa? Where would we have?
Reference. At
the end of the document, work site. Yeah. Right? But you came in a while ago. So her work is couched in the Chicago style.
I understand. I could ask her this. How she put the title in the document? She put it italics. Is that also MLA style, or we have to?
MLA is italics, or you put it, or you underline it.
Okay. Once they give a title of a
book.
Okay.
Books, italics, or underline.
Okay.
Articles in inverted commas.
Nice.
So just remember, anything in inverted commas is an article. Everything else is underline or italics. Okay. Good question. Anything else as we take a little pause? All right, let's go ahead. Nobody seemed to have anything else.
Other scholars have made a reference to names and naming to names and naming as one broad aspect of African cultural. Sorry.
Go ahead, you're right. And as one broad aspect of African cultural survival.
Yeah. Other scholars have made a reference to names and naming as one broad aspect of African cultural survivals, where they have merely dictated a few lines or chapters of their books to address the topic.
Where they're merely dedicated, not dictated, dedicated.
Oh, sorry. What I say? I say dictated.
That's okay.
Dedicated, whatever. Okay. Scholars such as Sterling Stuckey, Michael Gomez, and Jason Young have all conducted extensive historical studies that illustrate how African captives were enslaved, dehumanized, and debarred from practicing any of their cultural customs. More importantly, however, their study emphasizes how certain elements of African culture survived the oppressive conditions of the slave and colony experience in the Americas. For example, Sterling Stuckey pioneering study, Slave Culture, examined how enslaved African peoples in the South interacted to form a common culture due to the haphazard and brutal capture of Africans during the slave trade era.
All right. So what she's saying here, basically, remember, as I keep saying, her study is African American and African studies. So she's doing that for a department that is looking for her scholarship on the subject matter. So she's cited somebody called Sterling Stuckey. And and she said it's a pioneering study. Pay attention to her words. Her words are not just thrown in there to sound good or to sound bright, but she makes sure that she said it's a pioneering study, meaning that he's out there before. And okay, as I'm on that topic, folks, just be careful of the words you use, because I have seen one of our past students, vying to do a PhD and talk about her circadian rhythm. I'm like, oh God, Father, what is this? What is this? What is this? I almost hit the roof. When we were at school, well, at least I was exposed to something called a thesaurus. And a thesaurus helps you in putting something in context. So a word might not be wrong, but it's out of context. So I would suggest that when you use words, you also consult the thesaurus to see if it is written in context. And every word that you use must lead you into explaining what you're doing. Fair enough? So that she's saying this Stuckey's pioneering study is not something that everybody used to do. It is a pioneering study on slave culture, examines how enslaved African peoples in the South, where were they?
In America, South of America, in the United States.
Right. And in the southern states had the most brutal forms of enslavement. Right. The North actually freed them. They had freed the Africans long before the South. So a lot of the folks from the South used to run away up to the North. Key person in this Tubman, that Harriet
Tubman.
Right. She had that how do you call that? No, she was a heroine in freeing slaves from the South and taking them to the North. Once you got to the North, you were home free kind of thing, and you got your freedom papers. So she was running that the Underground Railroad is what they had her famous for in transporting the slaves out of the crossing the swamps and all of that, exposing themselves to the alligators and so on, but they made it across. Go ahead.
Drawing on a range of anthropological evidence and in West and Central Africa, Stuckey compares African cultural practices and folklore with that of enslaved Africans in America. According to Stuckey, enslaved Africans in America remained inherently African in culture even up to emancipation. Michael Gomez's compelling book, Exchanging Our Country Marks, The Transformation of African Identities in the Colonial and Antebellum South, argues that the slave trade seizes persons from vigorous geographic locations and cultural backgrounds in Africa and force them to coexist in a shared environment, having a common experience of enslavement in North America. Gomez focuses his research on the period prior to 1830 and draws upon a wide range of primary documents in Africa, anthropological findings, folklore, WPA ex-slave narratives, and slave runaway advertisements to trace the origins of African cultural practices that were evident in North America.
Okay. So here it is. She not only looks at his work, but she looks at the period in which his work was done, or the period of the research. Remember, I told you in doing research, somebody might have done research at a particular period. And if your research can help by doing at a later period, you sort of look at what period they looked at and what period you're looking at, and so on and so on and so on. Anybody okay so far, or everybody okay so far, as Prophet said?
So yeah, I mean, everybody wants it, I guess.
Adisa, you're going out?
No, I'm here.
Alicia, where are you? Alicia.
I'm here. You not see me? I'm here.
But, I mean, are you following?
I think this is very interesting. Yes.
Yeah, well, a little more than interesting, but I want you all to see how a literature review is good. It's not just, well, this book is good. You know what we get from students? I read this book and it's good, and I like it. And then it's not, you're not doing a book review, and you're not marketing a book. You're saying what is it and how it is aligned to your work. Was it same page with your work, or it's something different from what you work and what you are going to be adding to the work?
And also, Message Patrick, I see in the linkage in her topic also. She keeps in focus on the hot topic. So she's not straying here or there, she's really focused. And she's looking at the psychological part, the anthropological parts, and all of those. So I'm seeing it here in the literature review.
So therefore, you can also decide whether there are gaps in the thing.
Right.
It's a continuation of the research. Yeah? Okay, go
So,
ahead.
Mrs. Fitzpatrick, so with respect to my topic, then therefore, I can refer to other books like I'm talking now only about time with respect to spirituality. So I could refer to probably the Quran then and the Bible then and compare that narrative with respect to spirituality and time as against what the Africans did in slavery, what the enslaved people did with respect to carnival and spirituality.
Okay, so as long as you can link it to your work and it can sort of open another view or enforces or embellish it, then that's fine. If it's just something that you just throw in there to make it...
No. We comparing really and contrasting in terms of exposing the fact that spirits move at certain times.
Yeah, of course.
In all aspects of spirituality, whether it's African or otherwise, the spirit world seem to be going in the same place. If you understand what I'm saying.
As a matter of fact, you can actually, in your work, I wonder if I have any of those books. In your work, there are actual evangelists now, and African evangelists, by the way, that preach Christianity. By the way, it really drew to my attention because that's what she's teaching as well. That Christianity was in Africa long before Christ. Not long before Christ, sorry, that's Christianity. Long before, my bad, long before the Romans brought it to the New World or you know, the colonials. It was in Africa, the 12th century and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, you have the 12 tribe of Judah and all these this sort of thing.
So
Yeah.
when they brought it to the New World or with enslavement, they actually reordered, titled the whole thing to suit their narrative. Of course, they have the slave Bible too, but to teaches the Black church, but to make the treatment towards African justified in the sight of God. Good. So then you had that whole question where what do you call that that thing where this Noah's son saw him naked, and then he banished the whole grandson lineage, and they say that was the Black community.
Oh yeah, Sham on them, yeah.
So then you have that question. There's anyhow, it will come back to me since I've just gone there. But what I'm saying that you can actually use that question of evangelism, that they tell you that you have midnight prayers, and they tell you that you have to pray at 3 o'clock and so on. So the actual evangelists in this era now are telling you to ward off, you know, the negative forces that will be coming in your life, midnight prayers and 3 o'clock prayers and so on. So basically you tying it back with your thing of African spirituality.
Yes.
You also have this whole question of syncretism. So what they're saying is for the African, sorry folks if I go off topic a little bit. So when, you know what is this I'm saying, the Hamitic principles, son of Ham, that's what it is, the Hamitic principles. But let me get back to you, Jackie. So what the thing is, the narrative is, and we find a lot of spiritual Baptists doing that, they would start off their prayers or the feast doing Christian worship, because that is how they had to be accepted in the church and by the colonial masters. They had to.
Yeah, but right, yeah. So they were just hiding under that. But the bottom line is they did practice what they knew after that.
Okay, right. So by midnight, when they were sleeping, then the whole came alive and so on. So they to keep the traditions, they still do that I understand, in the fraternity, where they will swing by midnight and the African thing will come out and drum in and do it, because this is what they had to do to survive.
Yeah, but although it may sound so to people that they were hiding then and this is what they have to do, their teaching is that they call the spirit up at 12 midnight.
Yeah, because they had to call the spirits then, because they do it before as well. Remember, it was illegal as 1917.
Yeah, we're talking that as far as, yes, it was illegal then. We're talking that then. But prior to that, in their own original teachings, ma'am, they operate at every 3 hours.
Right. So there you go.
It will be either at 3 a.m., 6, it will be 3, 6, 9, 12. That is the African teaching, every 3 hours.
All you have to do in that regard is bring the books.
Where I'm getting that knowledge from, right?
Right. So that will be literature review. Your findings, very often your data collection and your literature review seem to have a synergy and a synchronized kind of behavior, because you're also going to be using that in your data collection as well.
Okay.
But we will get to that. So
yes.
Anybody
else want to say anything on that?
Yes. I think it makes a little more sense to me also. But tell me if I'm wrong. So more or less, I saying what my point of view is, but I'm using literature review to prove my point. I trying to prove. So or I want the test.
All right. So you're not trying anything really. What you're doing is highlighting what is there. Okay. So that, excuse me. So that if you want to do something on the steel band, and your work on the steel band, as in Dwayne's case, might be focusing on the children in the carnival playing the steel band. You look at Kim Johnson and their book, and Kim Johnson and their book talk about all sorts of things, the origin of the steel band, the the pioneers, the old time people. Puff book talk about it too, not the whole book, but in Puff book you will hear how Pan Trinbago was the creation that came out from George Goddard and these people in the days of yore, and Eric Williams something, and the steel band got sponsorship in the end because they made them into something respectable by making them form themselves into an organized body and blah 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 blah. But then again, here it is, Dwayne is saying, but I am looking at the children component of the steel band movement. How many people would have written on children in the steel band movement? And then, of course, you would have, he goes on again and he will find that Birdsong has a youth side, a Moko has a youth side, schools have school bands, and so on. There might be people writing on it. So his work is to try and see if, why am I with some of the thing in my truth? Like something. Yeah. His job now is to go out there and see if anybody spoke on that and the impact of steel band on the children. Now, is it the US Virgin Island, one of them, focus on children of deviant behavior when they're not conforming, they let them play steel band as a way of reforming them. And Puff always tells you in ethnomusicology that the steel pan is not just an instrument, commands a certain amount of discipline. As he would say, the pan leader just knocked the pan, pop, 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 everybody stands attention. It has an organization. You all might have done that with Dr. Otley as well. The sort of rigidity, the practice time, the runs that you have to do on the pan, the whatever it is you have to do, is a discipline that children can even fall in love with a pan player. You know, so these are the things. You look at the books that will bring out aspects of.
Okay, but what I want to know is, like, for instance, like that example you show where in the US Virgin Island, the deviant children, they use pan to calm them down. So so like Dwayne will say more or less in his review, he would say something like, well, the pan can be used to give children with deviant behavior an outlet, as shown in this book, so and so and so, but stated that in the US Virgin Island that happened. That is more or less how we have to do it.
Exactly. And that's when you have a book or some article, because you can also, and I have done that for some of the past students, go into Google, try and find the articles, and you will find articles, you will find online articles, which would be blogs, you would find newspaper articles, and you can cite those as well. Just remember, if it's an article, you have to put your web source and you have to put it in inverted commas and that kind of thing. It can be underlined in the book. So you have a special place in your literature review or your works cited just to put all of those things that you pull down from online and so on.
But Miss
Fitzpatrick,
sorry, go ahead, sir.
no, I was just asking whether Dwayne would say that, or whether Dwayne would say that the article said that.
Yeah, well, the articles would have said that. I don't think, is that what you meant, Adisa? The article would have said so.
Right, the article. So, but I not putting what I just stating what the article said more or less in the review. I'm not trying to put any assumption to it or anything like that, or my thoughts to it. to what the article said.
You can interpret it. Now the article says so, and you can even interpret it by maybe what the author himself or herself would have been meaning to convey as the good. So you put your article, and then what the central point of that article that the author wanted to convey to the reader.
Mm-hmm.
What aligns with your work is what is critical, or does not align, because it can align or it does not have to align. But then if it does not align, then you would have to say then, well, because it does not align with what you're doing, my work is important, or my work can add to the narrative.
Okay, yeah, making sense.
Right? But all we're trying to get to you is that you don't just drop a thing, well, the book say this and you're going, and the book say that and you're going, or you list the books and you're going. And we have had that.
Mm-hmm.
Book underline, book. We have even had where a student, well, she put on a whole set of articles, and I counted it was about 84 works cited, or 87 works cited, out of which was 17 books. And when I look in her document, nothing of the sort in her document. Now, what is that? That's a bibliography. That's not works cited. You just drop down books and say that book, that book, that book, that book, that book. Dicest.
Oh God, don't kill me.
Mr. Patrick, you made a valid point there, because you now differentiate the difference between work site and a bibliography. You know, stating that you just did something there for us, and I think maybe for others, defining the differences between the work site and just accumulating or adding more books to show that you have read.
So what happens, whatever is in text citation,
Mm-hmm.
what comes at the end of this. So all you're doing with your in-text citation, at the end of this page that says work cited, is to expand on where it comes from, the publisher, the authors, the this, the that. So you're just telling the person now where to buy the book. Like what you're doing, you know, look, you could buy the book on Amazon. Well, you're saying that, of course, but because you give any publisher and the year and the edition and the, which will not be in the body of your work, because you're talking about who is doing the work. Now, what I find, and that's just me, is that because some authors have several books, I tend to say in Dr. Liverpool's, or Liverpool's Horse's Mouth, because he has other books,
Mm-hmm.
and that. Some people just put Liverpool, and then you have to figure out which Liverpool, and when you go in the back of the thing, is about 3 or 4 Liverpool books they cited, and you don't know which Liverpool book that to go to. So to make it nice and happy for others, I tend to say in the epic work of Liverpool Rituals of Power, Rebellion, blah, 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 he inferred or posited or whatever is a fancy word, because again, you see, this said, this use this.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. There's several words to say: said, indicate, explain, contend, agree, disagree, rather than said. So you'll have to be, and I must commend Lisely here, because I mean, she's a much younger age, since 2012, and look at the style of writing. It's sophisticated, but it's simple enough so anybody could pick it up and understand. And that's what we're trying to inculcate in people's writing. You know, you don't have to copy everybody's writing style, and you have to be superfluous and using big words that they're making sense, but certainly with a little bit of, class. And saying, I've seen some paragraphs and one word appears about 6 times. I'm like, oh God.
Competitive.
This and the festival, and because the festival is this and the festival that, there's nobody present here, mind you, and the festival is this and the, jeez, so
Mrs. Patrick, why is it my own to prosecute the
I am not declared
prosecuting something?
yeah, right, no, but since you brought it, We'll talk about prosecuting something which has nothing to do with what he was doing. It's not even, it was like a persecution for me. Why are you prosecuting this thing?
Prosecuting something.
I remember the other one with the birth. You give anything birth?
I didn't mention that, Mr. Patrick. I mentioned prosecute.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Sorry, I did a Kamala there. I plagiarized your stuff.
Yeah.
You see how plagiarism can, for those of you in the WhatsApp thread and even the news reporting, my dear lady got some neophytes around her, I would imagine, to manage her social media platform. Oh God, somebody calling me, which is not the done thing. I'm not like, I have to do like Prof and say, I'm class. Did I get this one done? Okay, it's my cousin from the Turks. She's trying to get back home, so it's pointless. But I told her I was going to teach. But anyway, yeah. So, yeah. So be very careful with your language. Always double check. I mean, I have that policy for my own writing that anytime that I'm using a word and I'm not too sure about the context, I Google it and say, am I writing this word and using this word in the right context? And like recently there's this word poignant, P-O-I-G-N-A-N-T. And I'm like, something about this word doesn't sound like I should use it. And in fact, I should not have, because it meant a sad kind of story that, you know, and that's why I didn't want to convey that at all. So I said, oh my God, luckily I checked this, double checked this word. Usually I'm spot on. Usually I'm spot on if I'm like, but basically I don't take chances, especially if I have to get a document out to another source. So there was Miss Lady plagiarizing some big man in the opposition chambers in the UK who congratulated the newly elected President Biden. Wholesale, lock, stock, and barrel. Put the congratulatory message on Facebook, and right away people pick it up. And nowadays, because of the electronic technology, if you just put 3 words in a sentence, it can be picked up. So you have to be so careful, paraphrase it, quote it, change it around, mix it up, say where the source came from, that kind of thing. Sometimes people have the same way of expressing themselves, so that's the thing. But not a whole speech. You're going to take a whole speech. You know what I mean? So this is a no-no. There was actually a Roman Catholic priest, Father Charles, who did the same a couple of years back, and I think he had to leave the priesthood. Yeah, then when he wrote, he was writing on the newspapers, and next thing they found Father Charles wanted in that area, and they told him, you plagiarized this person's work. This is not your original work. And he had to eventually confess, being a Catholic, I guess he had to confess to God and man. And they told him, no, well, you can't, that's cardinal, so you can't really stick around us. And yeah, I think that's how it ended up. I'm not too sure, but he had to certainly stop writing again. It's as bad as that. So I think in the internal fight with the opposition, which is not our business really, I think those who are going against her are very happy to show up her error of ways, and they say, because she went off saying that she brighter than them and all that. But I think it's basically using or relying on the young people to manage her site that caused that. Of course, they pulled it down immediately, but the damage is already done. Right, so let's continue our business. According to Gomez, the conglomerates have enslaved. Is that where we reach?
No.
Where we reach?
He tracked the movement of the enslaved from the coast of Africa straight into North America. According to Gomez, the conglomerates of enslaved Africans brought not only their diverse cultures with them during the Atlantic crossing, but also exchanged country marks, which shaped a collective identity that was centered around race rather than ethnicity. This study is important as it accounts for the assortment of African cultural practices that exist in diasporic communities, particularly in the context of African names and naming.
Okay, so Adisa, you get it now? You get what you're asking?
Yes, I get it.
Okay, so after all the tralala, she said, she goes on to say that this study is important because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, so when you're doing your work, you have to always remember that this is the purpose of your literature review, to show what is out there. Okay? What is out there? Why is it important? What you can bring to, enhance it, make it different, embellish it, and so on. Okay? Alicia, anything? Jackie, what about you?
No.
Jackie?
There, I'm all right. I'm cool with that.
Okay, good.
See, Professor.
Understood.
Okay. When we were reading, what about Dwayne? Dwayne, is that making any sense? You think it's good for her to do that? Dwayne? All right, we are not getting Dwayne, but basically you're keeping your reader connected with what you're doing, and you yourself are being connected with why you have chosen the books and what you're doing with it, and how it ties back with your study. Go ahead, Neil.
Okay.
Such scholars have made cultural and practical references to the significance and implications of names and naming among enslaved populations. Gomez, in his book, discusses the names that appeared in the advertisements of runaway slaves. Some of these included names such as Sambo, Mustafa, Mamando, among others. It is important to note that the religion of Islam was prevalent in West Africa prior to the slave trade, and so many Africans had Muslim names. Moreover, some of the early African captives managed to escape the onslaught of their indigenous names upon their arrival in the New World. And so, Gomez was able to use those names to trace the ethnic and geographic locations of these African captives in Africa. For example, the name Sambo means the second son among the Fulbe, how do I pronounce that? Fulbe. Few scholars, however, have gone a step further in examining names and naming trends among both the enslaved and freed populations. Herbert Gutman's thoroughly researched book, The Black Family in Slavery and Freedom, 1750 to 1925, closely examines the naming practices of slaves and ex-slaves in South Carolina, Louisiana, Virginia, and North Carolina, and how naming was used as a cultural device in maintaining and establishing kinship and progeny among the African African enslaved and freed populations.
Okay. So remember what I told you in this particular work. What she did, what the author of this work did, is always put it in context where she was she's studying African and African American history and naming of the African enslaved population and how they were taken away from their names and the spiritual aspect of that and so on. When she researched the book, the book is in this period 1750 to 1925. Okay, and then she looked at what we said, it was in the South Carolina, Louisiana, well, Virginia coming up there, North Carolina. So that was the this whole context that she was looking at. She was looking at that and she kept it within that context. Good afternoon, Prof. Prof has joined us. Prof, probably not hearing Prof. Chris. Prof is muted.
Oh, I'm on now, I suppose.
Yes.
Right,
So,
I'm hearing you.
okay, so far, well, we have, well, as you know, we are doing Lizali's literature review, and the students are saying that they're now getting a good hang of it, where they
And let me thank you at the onset for this wonderful, this lovely piece of writing from Lizelle, and because they will see all the intricacies of writing a literature review.
Yeah.
And what I want to point out right away, she's not writing about books, etc., but she's writing about what has been said in books, the content of the books, etc.
Yeah.
Go ahead, I'm following you.
Yeah, I'll convey to her. So Neil, where are you now? She's gone on now to Gutman's book.
Gutman's book, published several years after the 1695 Monahan report.
Nice.
Sorry, 1965, sorry.
Okay.
1965 Monahan report challenges sociologist Daniel Monahan's, later US Senator, claim that slavery and its aftermath completely destroyed the Negro, quote unquote, Negro American family. According to Moynihan, the high prevalence of single mother families among American Negroes, quote unquote, was not due to the lack of employment, but rather was inextricably linked to the historical absence of Black fathers and husbands in Black family households, which he claimed could be traced back to slavery and the Jim Crow era in the United States. Gutman denies that slavery completely shattered the quote-unquote Negro family, arguing instead that despite of the oppressive nature of slavery and discrimination, enslaved and freed Africans sought ways to preserve and establish a culture among themselves. And one of the ways in which they did so was through naming. While the severance of Africans from their homeland and their enslavement in the New World had adverse psychological, physical, and sorry, sir, Professor?
Right.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Right, good.
What, sorry?
Go ahead, no, go ahead, no.
Go ahead, while the severance.
Okay. While the severance of Africans from their homeland and their enslavement in the New World had adverse psychological, physical, and cultural impacts, human beings are innately resilient creatures. It is this resiliency that enabled the enslaved population to survive and create a life and culture of their own, despite the oppressive and restrictive conditions prescribed for them under slavery.
So what I've been telling gives this a history around it. It's not just listing books, but to say, well, I read this book, I read this book, and this book is good, and that book is good, and that kind of thing that students have been given us in the past. But each book, she analyzes the book in a way that you would understand more of even what she's doing by seeing what they have done and to be able to compare as a reader what in fact her book is about. Go ahead. The name Negro.
Well, I guess the name in the book titled the name Negro the name Negro, its origin and evil use. Richard Moore is often quoted as saying, quote, "When all is said and done, slaves are dogs."
And dogs.
Sorry, when all is said and done, slaves and dogs are named by their masters. Free people name themselves, close quote. This analogy by Moore to the dog and slave with respect to their given names charts the course of the study to closely explore the relationship between naming, power, and freedom. Indeed, all these historical recounts are invaluable and lay the groundwork for my research, as they nonetheless provide the psychological and practical use of names. Sorry?
Logical.
What is it? Sorry, I said psychological, sorry. The physical and practical use of names and naming among slave owners, slaves, and ex-slaves. However, in addition to the external physical and psychological and physiological effects of naming, denaming, or renaming the African, this study will also focus attention on the long-lasting impact and implications that European systems of slavery, colonialism, and white supremacy would have had on the African psyche as a result of the obliteration of the indigenous names and naming practices.
Okay, stop right there. So anybody want to tell me what in fact has just happened there in this piece of work that they did?
Well, she brought it all home and she's contextualized all that she was saying.
Very good. So in fact, she's saying that while these people did this and they did that, and so on, I am looking at the long-lasting impact and implication that European systems, slavery, colonialism, and white supremacy would have had on the African psyche, etc. So you get right there, you're getting another feel of what the work is. She never leaves you to wonder what she's doing and why she's pointing out all what they have done. Always takes you back to the central, the focus of her study. Okay, go ahead.
Very rich.
For
instance, as sung in Black Identity, by the pronunciation of names, one's ethnic identity was readily known, except in the case of the colonized and enslaved Africans, whose names were altered. But how has this phenomenon also impacted the psyche of these Africans after having undergone such an impermissible act on their person?
Marie Heller?
No, sorry. Marie Heller and Newbell Puckett's book, Black Names in America, Origins and Usage, closely looks at the social role of names and naming trends among early Blacks in America, and reveals that by 1935, most Blacks ascribed to white values, which was indicated by name usage. Puckett's study provides an extensive collection of 500,000 names, 340,000 Black and 160,000 white, between 1619 to the mid-1940s. As such, Puckett's invaluable research and collection of names are used in this study to highlight the naming trends among Black Americans and their white counterparts throughout the years.
Okay, so just take a look in there now. So what she's actually telling you here, telling you that in her study, and this is what I was telling you, Alicia, sometimes your literature review is also, the book that you use there is also used in the data collection.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That I am using this down the road in my study because of what it does and what it shows and what it brings out. It says it's invaluable research and collection of names are used in this study to highlight the naming trends among Black Americans and their white counterparts throughout the years. And Prof, what I was telling them, the Calypso at the beginning, which was an asset because of her own identity from the Caribbean.
Yeah.
To show that how a calypso could be used to bring that whole thesis into focus.
Yeah, very good.
Were even marveling at the fact that our calypsonians are so brilliant and able to
Very
do
good.
that in a system where she's writing not for Carnival Studies program. She's not writing for a Trinidad study. She's writing a study in the United States at a US university. So,
Very good. Very good. What is most important, and I hope they're seeing it, and hope Neil and Adisa them seeing it, is that when you're writing the review, the literature review, they are talking about the content of the books and what other authors have said about a particular content. So if you get an idea or content in your books, you're writing about what has been said in that content and what have they said about that special content. In other words, they're talking about Black names in America, origins and usage, what has been said and what other people have said, what Phuket has said, what other people have said. Very, very important. So you're not actually reviewing a book in essence, but you're reviewing the content of books, the ideas, what has been said. The literature review is a review of what has been said in the book about your topic, or if not on your topic, but on ideas relating to your topic. That's the point you make it. Very important. But I hope you all understand it.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So,
I'm not a decent you.
So there's a wide range.
There is a wide range of research that shows the many ways African cultural practices survived.
Lovely.
Despite the injustices and constraints during slavery and the colonial and post-colonial eras. This paper examines the central role names and naming played in shaping, retaining, maintaining, claiming, and reclaiming an African identity and community, and at the same time, show how European slave masters and colonists use names and naming to subjugate Africans and obliterate their ancestral memory.
Lovely.
Sorry, I'm so accustomed to.
Go ahead.
Following the abolition of slavery, African people continued to experience human injustices. Not only were Africans denied access to their rich ancestry, but they have been underrepresented and grossly misrepresented in diasporic societies, even today. Irrefutably, there is a need for more inclusion of written sources that deal with African heritage within mainstream education, as well as literature, which focuses on the impact that centuries of European domination and barbarism had on the African psyche and culture, and the broader implications at present. In addition to acknowledging the devastating effects of slavery and its aftermath, there is also urgent need to also truthfully examine the various cultural identities, behavioral patterns, and practices of those oppressed populations of enslaved Africans who were subjected to such tyranny. It is necessary to observe and celebrate the resiliency, persistence, and significant contributions Africans made in shaping the fabric of society as a means of addressing some of the psychological and social issues that continually emerge not only as a result of slavery and colonialism, but also as a result of the subsequent years of racial injustice and miseducation that prevail in these societies.
Hope you understand. I hope you understand what she's saying.
Then a lot.
What she is saying is that in slavery, because of enslavement, Africans lost a lot. Because of enslavement, Africans lost a lot of their cultural traits, etc., and their cultural ideas. Because of slavery, Africans were subjected to all kinds of barbarism, etc. So she's saying, now let us look at what people have said. In other words, what have they said about these racial injustices, etc. How she's looking at. So it's not just the books, but what have they said about African resiliency, how they were resilient, how they observe these racial injustice, how they brave them, how they able to resist them, etc.
In reality, so was it really lost, or was it ridiculously suppressed that they could not even express it? But was it really lost?
Yeah, you know, what have been written about how they have resisted all these inputs, you know, how have they resisted, you know? That's what she's trying to say. All this miseducation and all this, you know, how they resisted on the whole. That's what she's saying. And so she's looking at what have you know what I'm trying to tell you, that
Yeah.
don't just look at the literature books, but look at the literature and what African went through and how other people captured it. That's what you're trying to say in your literature review.
Neil, while it may be considered,
While it may be considered a work of fiction, one cannot help but observe the epic film and novel roots, and the many scenes of savagery meted out to the protagonist and his struggles. Sorry?
I said meted out.
Okay, sorry, meted.
I'm saying the word meted out.
Right. I said meted. Is it also pronounced meted out or meted out? Meted out, okay. And the many scenes of savagery meted out to the protagonist in his struggles to maintain his African name, Kunta Kinte.
Let me stop you one time to show you that not just books, but you talk about the film now. In other words, literature review also take into consideration films and novels and all different things. What has been published, okay? Go ahead.
In his defiance and seemingly disobedience to his to Massa, simply by wishing to be called by the only name he knew, he was hogtied in shackles, flogged, brutally beaten, and maimed. The cruelty he endured in the innocent quest to retain his birth name could scarcely leave any human being without deep emotional scars, bitterness, acrimony, depression, and sadness, to say the least. The paper, therefore, traces the origins of indigenous African names and naming by drawing on a number of primary works, which include slave records, wills, photos, and a collection of anecdotal oral testimonies. As it examines the impact the Middle Passage, slavery, and colonialism had on the African psyche.
Just pause a little bit there, Neil, and I should tell you that during the study, and as I keep saying, this was in 2012, so she was a lot younger then at the time. Her study, she even went as far as Moruga in up down in the south in Trinidad, looking at the Americans and the companies, Fifth Company, the different companies, and that whole question of the Americans who brought into Trinidad and so on. So she looked at the name, she looked at the religion, she looked at the drumming, the so on. So I should tell you how the study took her back home to Trinidad and that link with America. Right.
The works of those who took the time to document indigenous African names and naming among various ethnic groups across the African continent often go unmentioned. As usually there will be no lengthy written record of such works. There are important studies on African names and naming, in particular, that have significantly shaped the course of many of my research. In 1001 African Names, the first and last names of the African continent, Julia Stewart offers an analysis of indigenous first and last names and the naming practices throughout the African continent to emphasize the centrality of such names and such names and practices in the lives of Africans.
And let me stop him, Mr. Patrick, to show them that see how she puts the name of the book in italics, so you know it's a book she's talking about.
Yes, they were.
1,001 African names, first and last names on the African continent. And she puts the author Julia. You know, it's an essay she's writing. And when you write an essay, when you read the name of the book, look how she puts the name of the book, so you can know it's a book she's talking about. But although she's talking about a book, where you can find it, she's talking about the content in the book. Yeah? Go ahead.
Stewart provides African names from over 25 countries and a variety of ethnic cultures in Africa for persons of African descent who were either forced to adopt or given Western names during colonial era slavery and its aftermath, and wish to assert their African identity through a reclamation of their African names. Through the reclamation of the African names. In her book, Stewart devotes a short paper on modern naming trends among African peoples, particularly among African Americans who have undergone naming changes during the late 1960s and 1970s in a continued movement of renaming and self-identification. In African names and naming, Jonathan Mercer's and Shirley C. How pronounce that? Bayakutaga utilize a different investigative approach by focusing on the relationship between African names and proverbs. According to these authors, the subject of names related to proverbs is little written about, though it is an intriguing and important aspect of African names. Mercer's and Bayakuta argue that most previous studies lacked philosophical insight and discussion on the application of African names and naming, and offered simplistic definitions of names, thus having a limited scope. As such, they sought to fill a gap and stimulate further investigation into what they considered a neglected field of inquiry. Their research is therefore used to provide Their research is therefore used to provide another point of reference on indigenous African names.
Let me stop you again. Sorry to stop you so often, Mrs. Patrick, but again, you see how you, instead of naming book and book and book and book, they put them together. They put the books together because these books together make the same point. So Misere and Utaga, they make the point. And because they make the point, they put them together. They sort of fill the gap. And it's for us, and she's telling you what the books have. Their research is therefore used to provide another point of reference. So you can put books together. You can say point A, book A, and book B, and book C tell us about so and so. Book D and book E and book F tell us about so and so. That's how you write literature review. Book A and book B and book C tell us about so and so. Book G, book H, and book J tell us about so and so. You see, in other words, you're writing the content. You're putting the emphasis on what has been written rather than the book itself. What has been written about these points? I hope you're getting the point. Adisa, I hope you're getting the point.
Yes, sir. Again, it's really clear.
Good. And then Mr. Patrick, I don't know if you I see she's using a lot of footnotes, number 14 and 15, because you can put these numbers and you can go down in the footnotes and see what she has said there. Very, very important.
Yes, she explained that to us.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
If you need to ask the author anything, she's here. She just got in from teaching, so she can.
Hi, good night.
Good night, Alicia.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
So anything you want to find out after the end of it, you can ask her.
Well, we're taking in the information, get good information.
Right.
Okay, where we reach, Prof?
In many ways,
In many ways, this thesis seeks to build upon an old historiographic argument and offers new insight on African cultural retentions as it pertains to the centrality of names and naming. In the late 1930s and 1940s, sociologist E. Franklin Fraser and anthropologist Melvin Hertzkovitz.
I remember that guy, Melvin Hertzkovitz. That's Prof's partner. You all remember him?
Yeah, musicology, man.
Yeah,
worked in Trinidad, worked in Togo.
Prof's partner. Okay, go ahead.
Right.
In the late 1930s and 1940s, sociologist E. Franklin Fraser and anthropologist Melvin Hertzkovitz engaged in a public and lengthy debate over the issue of whether people of African descent in the Americas had retained any aspects of their African culture. Fraser asserts that American enslavement was so damaging and traumatizing to Africans that all elements and cultural memory of African heritage were destroyed. In sharp contrast to Fraser's view, Edward Braithwaite explains.
Braffett.
Braffett.
Prof, what I also sorry, Neil, what I also told them that she's using a Chicago style. So don't get too absorbed in the style because it would be a little different from our MLA. But you see, like those quotes and the block marks, we don't use that in MLA. But I think they should be wary of that, and I explain that.
Yeah. Watch the quotes. Yeah. Quotes are put there to strengthen your point. You know. Go ahead. Braffett explains.
There has been a what?
There has been the persistent and
okay. But Braffett explains. Okay, I didn't say okay. Braffett explains there has been a persistent and established theory which contends that the Middle Passage completely destroyed the culture of African slaves, and as such was the catastrophic and definitive experience that none of those transported during the period from 1540 to 1840 escaped trauma. But modern research is pointing to a denial of this, showing that African culture not only crossed the Atlantic, but also survived and creatively adapted themselves to its new environment. Again, Melvin Hertzkovitz's groundbreaking thesis, The Myth of the Negro Past, sought to challenge the notion that the culture of African peoples was primitive and produce evidence on the survivals of African cultures in Brazil and the Caribbean.
Right. I hope you know what you're saying there. Sorry to cut you. I hope you know what you're saying. What she's saying there, Neil. She's saying that Fraser and those guys wrote books about when Africans left Africa to come to the Caribbean, they lost their culture. They lost all their African roots. They lost everything because they crossed the seas. And when they came here, they brought nothing. But he's saying that while Fraser is saying that, people like Melvin Hertzkovitz says that is not true. That they were big people, and they came here and they brought their culture with them, and given because why is she saying that? She is saying that to show that these names, she's writing on the name and family. She's saying that these names, all these things are names, and the reason for having these names were brought to the Caribbean. So she's saying that I'm writing about names and naming, and I'm saying that all these naming, all these ways of naming Africans were brought by Africans to the Caribbean. Why? Because Hertzkovitz showed that they brought a lot of all these African traits here. So whilst Fraser and them are saying we brought nothing, Hertzkovitz is saying that is untrue. They brought many things to the Caribbean, one of which was their naming societies and their way of naming peoples. In other words, they brought their culture with them. That's what she's trying to say, tell you. And Hertzkovitz's book is called The Myth of the Negro Past, which he put in italics to show you a book he's talking about. And that book challenges the nature, challenging Southern nature, the notion that African people was primitive and they brought evidence on the survivals of African cultures in Brazil. So she's trying to tell you that I am writing about the names of Africans, and here is proof that Africans brought all that naming procedures with them to the Caribbean. So the literature review shows, she's telling you that this literature review shows that Africans brought their naming facilities and their naming ideas with them to the Caribbean. I'm making sense? I hope I'm making sense.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, we can move on.
You're tired, we don't know you're going ahead. Somebody else wants to
I'm going ahead, man. Let you go. When I dare you go bury me.
You're close.
Neil practicing for when he had to do his thing, his thesis, or no?
Yeah.
Yes, not, no. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
You just put jab on your Neil, we will just put jab on your tombstone.
There we go. There we go. Although it is a truism that African cultures were vastly disrupted as a result of the brutal removal of Africans from Africa, transshipped, then enslaved in a new and strange land, there is strong evidence that Africanisms were retained, which may be found deeply rooted in the slave naming practices.
That's a nice piece of Miss Annette Thompson, who is trying to talk about Africanism. You see there?
No.
She's talking about Africanism. If she were here, I would show her that, you see. That her scriptures is saying, no, that ain't true. That Africanisms were retained. Okay, go ahead.
Therefore, before researchers like Moynihan could proffer claims that problems associated with the Black family are inextricably linked to the period of enslavement, more so that slavery completely destroyed the Black family, the Black family, and Africans were tabula rasa when they arrived. Sorry?
Tabula rasa.
I said, oh, tabula rasa, tabula. Sorry, I said instrument.
Let's stop you again. Tabula rasa means you have nothing. Tabula rasa means you have a clean slate. It's Latin for a clean slate. Tabula rasa.
I also told them, Prof, I don't know if you will hear then, that, you know, they look at the beauty in the language where it's not so complicated to understand, but yet she's using some sophistication in words that it gives it a bit of scholarship, and they should try to get used to writing, you know, doing some nice word substitute.
Oh, yeah.
Like you at this level, and not this one say and that one do and say, and you know,
yeah.
Make it, you know.
Tabula rasa. Go ahead. Africans had a clean slate. Go ahead. When they arrive in the New World.
When they arrive, yeah. Tabula rasa when they arrive in the New World. It's important to trace the cultural practices which existed on the African continent before colonial imperialism and the slave trade. It is also necessary to examine the adaptive mechanisms used by Africans in the New World, such as naming practices, to understand how they survived under the oppressive system of enslavement and adjusted to the strange environments.
Yeah. Notice that she have all the books and things in a footnotes. She has all the books you can look at. Or what she's saying, she has all the books at the bottom there. That is very, very important. Note that good. Right.
Yeah, but then again, Prof, remember, as I was telling them, this is the Chicago styling. So this is what they would have to put as their works cited at the end of MLA.
They have to put all these things in their work cited at the end. Right.
Now, the next line, I just want Prof somebody to tell me what is the difference in that, the way how she has that in quotes.
But the MLA system puts all the work cited at the end, and this Chicago system puts all it right away, because Chicago wants to look at it right away. It doesn't matter. Yeah. You know? So, if you're using MLA, use MLA right through. If you're using Chicago style, right through. Use it right away. That's all. Any system that could.
Yes, yeah, so
UDC accepts both systems. Both systems. We use MLA, but UDC accepts both systems. Yeah. You can't mix them up. That's all. Don't mix them up.
Prof, in the next line, you were pointing out something to them. Let me see if they can tell you the difference here now. In quote, naming and linguistics, Africanism and African American culture, unquote, Fande states, Why is that in quotes?
It's either a journal or an article.
Right. So that
Lovely,
runs between
lovely.
that
Lisa.
quote and the book quote. That is what Prof is talking about.
Yeah.
And she says at the bottom, it's 104 to 5, so it means it came from a journal.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Nice.
Well done, Adiza. I was stumped there myself.
Yeah.
Okay. In naming and linguistic Africanisms in African American culture, Mfande states that Hurkowitz's finding on African survival would derive primarily from Caribbean and South American experiences, and use West Africa as the exclusive base for the origin of Africanisms. According to Mfande, by focusing solely on West Africa as the basis for Africanisms in the New World, Hurkowitz limits the parameters and applicability of his study. Mfande makes reference to later studies that have extended the area of inquiry of Africanisms on the continent and throughout diasporic cultures, which have served to inform the study in significant ways. Mfande cites scholars such as Michael Gomez and Walter Rucker, who claim a vast majority of Africans were seized from West and Central African cultures and transported to the New World during the slave trade period to emphasize the wide range of cultures that crossed the Atlantic. Building upon the work of Sterling Stuckey, Herbert Gutman, and Lumpenga Mfande et al.
Many more.
I have explored the many ways African peoples managed to retain elements of their African cultural ancestry, and how the sacred and integral practice of naming took shape throughout the
abominable.
The abominable histories of European domination and white supremacy. In this article, Mfande introduces another important era of investigation, as he mentions ways which diasporic Africans named elements of the new environment, such as food, music, dance, animals, and places.
I hope you understand what she's writing about, Neil. She's saying she is writing about names and naming, but names and naming are all part of the elements of African cultural ancestry. In other words, Africans didn't come here just with names and naming, but Africans came here with all different aspects of the African ancestry. So she's trying to show you that in books. I hope you understand me. In other words, while she's concentrating on names and naming, she's telling you that whilst I'm looking at names and naming, Africans brought a lot of different ways here. In other words, Africans didn't just bring their names, Africans brought many other elements in their environment, such as food, music, dance, animals, places. So names and namings are just one aspect of what Africans brought. Making sense?
So absolutely.
Making sense, Adisa?
Yes, sir.
Good.
Making sense.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that enslaved Africans were often refused the right of naming themselves, they nonetheless channel their innate rights by bestowing names upon things in the environment.
Mm-hmm. And you have all the examples in the bottom there. You see all her examples and where you can get them, all the books, etc., which you have to put in your MLA, which you have to put in your works cited page at the end, right? Good. Go ahead.
Joan Nagel's Constructing Ethnicity, Creating and Recording Ethnic Identities and Culture is considered as she examines the formation and recreation of identity and culture as the basis for ethnic construction, which is very relevant to the study of the adoption of African names and naming practices in a diasporic context. And its impact on consciousness and identity. Sorry, I read that again.
You're going good.
I get lost there.
And its impact on consciousness and identity formation.
Which is relevant to the study of adoption of African naming practices in a diasporic context, and its impact on consciousness and identity formation, particularly during the Black Power era and its aftermath.
So when you talk about in a literature review, and you're looking at peripheral things on literature review, why is this what she's saying? Although I'm looking at names and I'm looking at naming, yet at the same time she's saying that this person, Joanne Nagels, who wrote about constructing ethnicity and creating ethnic identity and culture, she said, I'm considering that because all that is part of the recreation of identity and culture when you came across here. In other words, all that naming, etc., her book is also part of that whole element of recreating identity. When they came across here, they had to recreate the identity. Who am I? Etc. I hope I'm making sense. So naming and having names, what she's writing about, is just part of that whole recreation. That's why she brings the book, Joanne Nagels, Constructing Ethnicity. Making sense? I hope I'm making sense. If I'm not making sense, say so.
That's making sense, man.
Yeah.
And that's how you call it. You may not get a book on names and naming, but you'll get a book on constructing ethnicity. You get all these things you get in these books, and so she's telling you what has been written. A person may not write a book about name what she's writing about, but there are books about recreating ethnic identity. And when they came across Africa, they had to recreate their identity. And these are all books that you can find.
As I said, it's peripheral reading.
Yeah, you have to read a lot. A similar approach?
A similar approach is being carried out in this study for the Caribbean and North American, where diasporic cultures and communities exist. In the naming of Afro-Caribbean cultures, Richard Burton uses a collection of primary sources such as plantation journals, ship's logs, and baptism records to compile his article on naming trends in the Caribbean and North America during plantation slavery and the post-emancipation era. In his article, Burton argues that Afro-Creole culture was an oppositional culture rather than a culture of resistance. By this, Burton means that Africans, enslaved and free, in their new environment, rather than retain indigenous names, they often move towards adopting the names of their powerful masters or famous European personalities. His research has been particularly useful for many studies, such as
For my study.
His research has been particularly useful for my study, as there is evidence that enslaved Africans also conscientiously resisted against white supremacy in overtly and covertly retaining their African names. Though this phenomenon would dissolve throughout the years, Burton offers substantial data that attests Africans adopted more European style names following emancipation, while some opted for new names.
You get the point you're making? She's saying that when you look at that man's work, she's showing you why Africans changed their names and why Africans took some European dominated names because of the dominance of European power, etc. She's showing you why they took it. She's trying to show you why some Africans use those European names.
And Prof, what I've noticed too in the whole thing, she's giving different eras and how it impacts throughout. So she look at the enslavement, emancipation. Now she's doing the black.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did I hear me?
Yes, coming too soft now.
Oh, sorry, no, I'm saying, Prof, what I've also observed, are you hearing me any better?
Yeah, a little better.
Yeah, okay. What I also observed is that she looked at different eras in this whole construct of naming and
Yes.
identity. So she looked at the pre-emancipation period, the emancipation period, and she's building up throughout. And now she's doing the era of the 1960s and 70s, so the height of the Black Power. So let's see what happens there in what she found.
Different eras, yeah.
Eras.
Yeah. All right. During
the Black Power era in the 1960s and 1970s, and a few years prior, many African Americans and Afro-Caribbean individuals went through a process of self-identification and renaming, and adopted names which were more in line with their African heritage. According to Mfande, although, quote, the process of renaming among African Americans began at the dawn of American history, the most visible outburst of African name reclamation came with the civil rights movement in 1960s, and high profiles of the people involved in the naming exercise gave the process prestige, close quote. William L. Vanderburg, New Day in Babylon, the Black Power Movement and American Culture, 1965 to 1975, examines the Black Power paradigm and the collective thrust made by Black Power activists towards racial pride, self-reliance, and self-definition, which evolved into the Black Power movement. In his book, he explores the cultural expressions of the Black Power, and the revolt in and of culture where an adaptation of African names played a significant role. Frantz Fanon, Saviors in Black Satin, White Masks, that colonialized minds become alienated from their own culture and identity by speaking the language of the colonizer.
Neil, that would be Black Skins, White Mask, and not Black Satins.
That was it?
Yep.
Sorry. Oh my, okay.
White Mask, go ahead.
All right. Since language is the carrier of culture, Frantz Fanon contends that to take on a language at the expense of your own is to appropriate its world and culture. In the same way, historian Raphael Powell, in Human Side of a People and the Right Name, says that the name belongs to the language of the one who has power, the one who controls the culture and the land. In Black Power, the Politics of Liberation and in Black Power, the Politics of Liberation in America, Stokely Carmichael and Charles Hamilton avow that Black liberation cannot be achieved through the traditional political processes which existed in the US, but rather through the creation and organization of their own political systems. Accordingly, they rejected co-option and endorsed black nationalism. Black nationalism. Wow. Sorry. Any comments? No? These studies provided accounts of the general mood and movements of Africans as they reclaim their ancestral names, and have been used as source material in the primary references of more contemporary naming trends among African peoples, and the ways in which diasporic Africans sought to assert their ancestral identity, thereby further invoking an African consciousness. Additional sources include Ben Martin's article, From Negro to to African, The Power of Names and Naming. That examines the power of names and the politics of naming in an American context. Specifically, the article looks at ethnic conscientiousness as radical assertiveness, racial assertiveness that become more pronounced during the Black Power era. The announcement of African American as a new ethnicity and the move from being called Negro to Black to African, as the title of the article suggests, as well as its impact on the African psyche and the political arena. Martin argues that names can be more than tags. They can convey powerful imagery. So naming, proposing, imposing, and accepting names can be a political exercise. He says that for Blacks to be called African American possesses deeper meaning. Martin cites Jesse Jackson, who at a December 1988 news conference in Chicago said, quote, "To be called African Americans has cultural integrity, but it puts us in a proper historical context. Every ethnic group in this country has a reference of some land base, some historical cultural base," close quote. Quote, "Distinctive African American names and experimental historical and linguistic analysis of innovation," close quote, a study done by Stanley Lieberson and Kelly S. Mickelson offers competing insights into the increases in the creation of unusual names among African Americans, and mentions the role that the Black Power era and related events played in intensifying African American names. In the study, Lieberson and Mickelson used race-specific data to measure the frequency of unique names among African American and white girls and boys in Illinois in 1916 to 1989. Their statistics reveal that African American parents were more likely than white parents to give their children unique names. Drawing upon the previous studies of such as Puckett et al., Lieberson and Mickelson report that there is enough evidence to support that the Lieberson and Mickelson report that
I'll bring the reading to what you're reading. Yeah.
Mickelson and Lieberson report that there is enough evidence that supports the view that African American invented names, quote, are at least in part historical derivations from African practices and or simply reflect a contemporary surge of interest in Africa among African Americans. Inversely, they contend African origins also influence naming, but in these influences do not operate in the societal vacuum that are modified by the existing practices within the dominant society, close quote. While these arrangements bear truth,
this argument bears truth.
While these arguments bear truth, Africans, enslaved and free, did not all simply give into the dominant culture, but found creative ways to adapt in their new environment, thereby shaping the very fabric of mainstream American culture as they found ways to retain key elements of their culture in names and naming practices. Lieberson and Mickelson propose the need for there to be a, quote, before and after analysis, close quote, of what happened to American names And sorry?
No, I said, go ahead. I'm trying to,
Africa, sorry, what happened to African names
Sorry.
and the practice of naming when Africans were brought into the New World as a result of slavery and colonialism and the clash of cultures. The punitive measures which European colonizers, slavers, and slave masters enforced sought to prohibit African names and naming practices. And this became the focus and of investigations on the impact of slavery and European domination on the African psyche and culture. Al-Muzari, The Africans, A Triple Heritage, discusses the consequences of the European intrusion and imposition of different naming cultures on indigenous Africans. He also mentions the advent of Islam on the African continent and the resulting shift in naming cultures. Further, Muzari examines the indigenization. Sorry, I don't know. Indigenization. What the hell?
Indigenization.
Indigenization. I don't know why I can't say that word. Indigenization. What the hell?
Go ahead.
Sorry.
African names during the
Of African names during the Pan-Africanist era in Europe to respond. Sorry, okay, I'm sorry.
You're getting tired.
Yeah, sorry. Further, Missouri examines the indigenization of names during the Pan-Africanist era in response to the European Christian names, where to Africans, the name signifies the spirit. He says, quote, personal names are inseparable from the issue of identity, close quote.
I'm going to stop you for a little while because you read a lot there, Neil. What you were saying, and I don't know if anybody, I hope everybody is following you. I don't know if they follow you, Adisa and Alicia. They were saying that when Africans came here, they were searching for names, etc. And they didn't just pick up names just so. They were trying to identify themselves with Africa. They were trying to make a link with Africa, and the identity is very, very important. So they were looking for that link with the African ancestry before they named themselves. That's what they're trying to say. All what you read there. And Ali Mazrui is one of the fellows who write a book about Africans. Al Mazrui writes a lot of book on Africans. Some book on Al Mazrui, some book on Ali Mazrui. But he wrote a lot of books about how the Africans came and what they did. And he was saying that Africans definitely search for that spirit, for that question of identity, to identify themselves with the African heritage. That's what he's trying to say. In other words, they didn't just name themselves any stupid name, but their names have a link with where they came from and they identified with Africa when they came. That's why they named themselves so.
Prof, just a little insert there. If I recall, when she was doing her PhD then, and she was doing this thing on Orisha religion and so on, she also talked about shackled bodies but unfettered spirits. And this is what I'm finding here in this Ali Mazrui part, where the spirit was also what they were searching for. So it's shackled bodies but unfettered spirit. And I think she was doing that in the context of the Baptist faith and the Orisha faith, where the spirit was still there. They couldn't take that spirit away from them.
Personal names are inseparable from the issue of identity.
Yeah.
Very important.
Okay.
Very, very important. In other words, Africans don't name people Vikey like some Europeans do. You don't just name it Vikey, I give you a name, how you look, how your nose look, how your face look, how your eyes look. You identify Africa.
Sometimes and sometimes the day and the hour you're born and all those things.
How you're born, especially with the fourth child, even the seventh child, etc., etc. The pain your mother bore, all these things they name by.
Yes.
Ayagoro Ome. Ayagoro says, your name Ayagoro means painful. That means his mother had pain and birth. Painful. Ayagoro Ome. Painful. That's right.
Wow.
Go ahead. Linda Myers' understanding on Afrocentric worldview.
Right. Linda Myers' understanding an Afrocentric worldview. Introduction to an Optimal Psychology affirms that among Africans, the spiritual and the material are the same. One. As such, Myers' book is used in conjunction with Joy Leary's Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome and Counseling Persons of African Descent, Raising the Bar of Practitioner Competence, to study the psychological implications of the slavery for enslaved Africans and their progeny, and the stigmatization of their names and identity in a Eurocentric environment.
Notice you have all the names of all the books. She have all the books in italics. And notice that good, eh?
Lastly, the recent MIT Chicago 2002 study entitled "Are Emily and Brendan More Impermeable Than Lakeisha and Jamal?" A field experiment on labor market discrimination examines labor market discrimination against persons who possess ethnic names. The study is used in my research to provide quantitative evidence of discrimination against persons with African American sounding names during a job application phase in the United States.
That's very important, Ms. Patrick, because she Lizelle brings you back to show that all what I'm writing here, I am bringing it back to my research. Yeah? She's my research. I'm not just talking about all these things in a field. I'm talking about all these things in relation to my research. That's usually what in my research to provide quantitative evidence of discrimination. In other words, some people discriminate when you have African names. They discriminate against you. As they hear your name, like Obama, and they hear Obama, you know, Obama went through a lot of that discrimination, and Obama spoke a lot about that. In other words, she's trying to say that in this, people write this book to show you that when people have African names, sometimes you're open to discrimination.
And Trump used to call him a Muslim, and this Muslim man. So, you know, because, you know, they go with Muslim in the US, so he labeled him a Muslim.
Yeah, that's very important. So although she's talking about, in her thesis is about namings, and Adisa, although she's talking about names and naming, that's her theme, she's telling you, while name and naming is my theme, there are a lot of peripheral ideas and peripheral themes and peripheral areas that relates to my theme, such as discrimination when I give you an African name. Good. You know why I'm saying that? Because some people say, I ain't find no book on my team.
But funny enough, Prof, that is how I started this afternoon's lesson. I said,
oh, good, very good, very good, very good. Some people say, I ain't find that man design. You didn't find that man design. I find that man just a music. You might find that man just a music. But there are all kind of musics in the world that people write about. You see? So she's saying, you may not find anything on naming, but there are so much areas on naming, such as discrimination against persons who possess ethnic names. All right. I see she coming to a very important point now. What is missing from the literature? The gaps that are, Neil, the gaps that are missing, very important. In other words, I'm doing this thesis, and one of the reasons I'm doing this thesis is because there are a lot of gaps missing. Gaps, in other words, there are many things that people have not researched that bear relevance to my team. Go ahead,
However, what is missing from the literature above is a central focus on the psychological impact that the annihilation of African names had on the African identity and experience on the continent and throughout the diaspora. Most of the aforementioned studies have tended to focus primarily on the cultural significance and implications of names and naming, with little reference on the African psyche. I have not found a body of research that has discussed extensively the psychological impact of European imperialism on the African self, being, and identity resulting from the obliteration of their indigenous African names and forced adoption of Spanish, British, French, Portuguese, and Dutch names, references, labels, or titles.
You know what she's saying there, Neil? That we talk about the cultural significance of the names, but we are talking about the psychological impact. The impact when you obliterate those names, when you take away those names from us. She hasn't found that impact. In other words, people write about the cultural significance, but they write about if you obliterate, that means you take away. When you take away those names from us, people now write about those things, how it affects us.
Yeah.
And she goes, of course, I'm sure she's going to develop the point now. Go ahead. I have not yet found a body of research.
Where
Go ahead.
Lost just now. I'll not to review. Okay.
In
I have
an
not yet
article,
found the body of research. Are we already?
yeah, you're already.
Oh.
In an article entitled
African American Names, a brief literature review with implications for future research, close quote. Laurie Shepard et al. Admit that there is an argument, there's an urgent need to now study the psychological impacts of names, and have provided several studies that look at different aspects concerning names and naming trends in the United States, and the stigmatization attached to unusual names.
I hope you understand what she says. We have to look at that now. How names affect people.
And also the article is in quotation marks, not in italics as or underlined as the books, as Prof been pointing out all throughout the readings. Books are italicized or underlined, but the articles are in quotes. I think Adisa answered that question earlier. Why was it in quotes? Because it's an article from a journal, no doubt.
Yeah.
Right. In this context.
However, none of these studies has examined the psychological importance of the history of names and naming among Africans and the impact of slavery and its aftermath. In this context, it should be noted that names and naming not only hold spiritual and psychological significance, but they also map the histories of people, places, and events. This study, therefore, seeks to explore how the obliteration of African names and naming practices by European colonizers served to inject a sense of shame and legacy of inferiority among Africans and African descendants in the New World.
Very, very important. Very, very important. Very, very important. Mrs. Patrick.
Yeah, because when I read this now, you remember what happened during the Black Power era when you start to adopt African names. People used to laugh at you. Your own African people laughing at you. We're going with that name. We can't use that name. What kind of Zulu name and Congo name you have there?
Yeah.
So this is an important point. You start to feel ashamed of your own name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, Mrs. Patrick, very important to everybody, to Neil Bernard and to Adisa and to Alicia, very important. What she's saying also, she has it openly, is that when you write your literature review, let me make it slowly. I'll try to talk to students about these things. When you write your literature review, it gives you an opening into what your hypothesis would be. Yeah. What will be your research questions? What are your objectives? What are you trying to do? Hear what you said? This study therefore seeks to explore how the obliteration, how you take, when you remove African names then by European colonizers, how it injects a sense of shame and legacy of inferiority among Africans. So actually, she might well tell you that one of her research questions will be, how does the removal of African names bring about a system of shame on people in the Caribbean? From your literary review, you get research questions. Some people write a research question and things like long before. And usually I tell students that think before you write your research questions, look and see what your literary review has told you, because the literary review might well link and shape you up into what your research questions will be. So here she has told you, one of my research questions will be, how does an obliteration of African names bring about a sense of shame and legacy among Africans and African descendants in the New World? Am I making sense? I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, Prof.
You wouldn't have seen that until you write a literary review. So literary review sometimes helps you to find your research question or your hypothesis. Very important.
Yeah.
Making sense? Mr. Neil, I hope you've seen that, Neil.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But go ahead. It encourages.
It encourages Africans to embrace their heritage and rise up against blatant and latent racism. As there is the current debate that parents who give their children African American sounding names are acting irresponsibly given the negative impressions that mainstream society has with such names.
Beautiful.
The study is, sorry?
Go ahead.
The study is part of an ongoing quest to stimulate African consciousness through emphasizing the centrality of African names and naming practices in the empowerment of the African psyche. It looks closely at the roles political movements, namely the Black Power movement, played in shaping an African consciousness and identity by the adoption of African names in post-colonial times. The study is both linear and non-linear in nature, as it crosses both time and space to investigate names and naming practices and trends throughout the African continent, as well as world history. As such, it is divided.
Hold on, Neil. Prof, you know, this question here brings me right back to what you keep telling us, that your work is usually informed from your undergrad level and take you right through to the PhD.
Yes.
What this tells me, her major was in psychology, and you realize she's only going back to the African psyche and the African consciousness, and that could be that underlying thing there in her psychology major, that there's something there that I have to link with my African and African American studies minor to link the whole thing together. So Prof, this holds true exactly what you're saying there with what probably influenced her as well.
And she's also saying what the studies are about. Yeah. But all what the studies are about is based upon her literary, to a large extent, is based on a literary review.
Yeah.
And she's telling you therefore what this study is all about. And therefore she's telling you therefore that this literary review points to my research questions and points to my hypothesis.
Yeah. So true. Go ahead, Neil.
As such, it is divided into 4 parts, each of which examines the importance of names and naming in the lives of continental and diasporic Africans. The following chapters demonstrate the deliberate attempts made by European colonizers to annihilate African memory and identity, and explore the ways in which Africans developed ingenious methods of resistance through names and naming practices. Chapter 1, quote, African names and naming practices, close quote, explores the myriad of African
Myriad.
The myriad
Period.
of African indigenous names and naming practices in sub-Saharan Africa in an attempt to trace their origins and significance of the African continent. Contemporary books on African naming practices, names, and their traditional meanings have been referenced in this study to show the integral and diverse roles names and naming played in the lives of Africans throughout the continent and diaspora. The first chapter examines the available published sources in African names and naming, and the few field works that have been done by scholars in African linguistics, onomastics, and anthropology.
But she's just trying to tell you why the different chapters and what they mean in section, how she came to them. That's all she's telling you. Go ahead.
Right. Chapter 2.
Chapter 1 is African names and naming practices. Chapter 2 is in European invasion. Yeah.
European invasion, the impact of slavery and colonialization. Examines the impact that slavery and colonial domination had on African names and naming practices throughout the African diaspora and on the continent, drawing upon primary sources such as slave records that include ship logs, baptism records, plantation journals, auction and runaway posters, manumissions records, and what's a manumission record?
Manumission came from when you buy your freedom.
Ah, okay.
And again, going back to you, Prof, you see that whole question of the baptism records is so important. Sometimes you're not even getting your birth records from the legal department, you get it in the church.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Manumission records and wills. The chapter affirms that names and naming played a pivotal role in the power struggle that ensued between European colonizers, slave owners, and enslaved Africans, as the former sought to claim ownership of the African, and the latter as she or he fought to retain identity. For the enslaved Africans, names and the practice of naming held special significance, which began as well as flourished in their homeland. However, upon arrival in the New World, Africans were often barred from exercising their right to name and the practice of their indigenous customs. As such, this chapter will explore the different strategies employed by slave masters to vilify and dehumanize Africans through the use of names and naming, and simultaneously show how Africans resisted and responded to those restrictions. Chapter 3, in African names, identity, and protest. I maintain that the adoption of African names by revolutionary-minded Blacks during the Black Power era, 1965 to 1975, both in the US and the Caribbean, evoked a pronounced sense of African consciousness. Certainly, there were
You see the word percolate?
Yeah, sorry. Certainly, there were percolating events prior to 1965 that led to the heightened call for Black consciousness and identity among diasporic Africans, as well as those on the continent, in addition to individual actions taken by revolutionary-minded persons in the US and the Caribbean, namely Trinidad and Tobago, that fueled Black pride. The Black Power Revolution in Trinidad in 1970, regarded as a crucial juncture in the shaping of Black identity and consciousness, as many men and women abandoned their European names for African names and adopted and advocated for the adoption, inclusion, and acknowledgement of African culture by the dominant society. Victoria Presley, the Black Power movement in Trinidad, an exploration of gender and culture and the development of the feminist consciousness offers an historical insight into the emergence of the Black Power movement in Trinidad as she examines gender consciousness and the cultural shifts that took place as Afro-Trinidadians fought for African consciousness and racial justice. In this context, I only seek to demonstrate, I not only seek to demonstrate how the adoption of African names aided in the construction of identity, but also how it
concretized the people.
Concretize all people's and collective memory by recording the circumstances and the experiences. I have made a reference to these available sources to reinforce the point that the European colonizer did not obliterate African. I'm making up words now. I've referenced these available sources to reinforce the point that the European colonizer did seek to obliterate African collective memories by assigning them new names as a way of subjugating them and consigning them to servitude. Given the historical context, this chapter addresses questions such as how did African descendants in the Caribbean and in the US resist this process of obliteration of their memories and African identity? This chapter examines 1. The impetus for the adoption of African names by revolutionary blacks during the Black Power era, both in the US and the Caribbean. 2. How the adoption of African names impacted the formation and recreation of individual and ethnic identities. 3. The ways in which Blacks went about changing their legally registered names to their newly acquired African names. Example, how practical and challenging was the process of changing one's name? What were some of the reactions one faced following the adoption of African names? Were they accepted by family members and the wider society? How widespread was the adoption of names? And 4, how the adoption of African names during the Black Power era challenged white hegemony and revolutionized the surroundings by inserting a pronounced African presence, namely in the US and the Caribbean. Moreover, what life-changing consequence did the adoption of an African name have on the African psyche? Example, did the name change bring about a greater sense of self, belongingness, and consciousness? All these aspects have been examined to assess the impact the adoption of African names and naming practices had on the psyche of society, as well as the many ways in which names and naming were used to erase African ancestral identity and memory, and at the same time serve as a means of cultural retention and resistance against racial oppression. It is anticipated that this chapter will provide a deep understanding of wider awareness of African names and naming practices and their central role in establishing an African identity. Later on, resistance to the prevailing Eurocentric dominance and political landscape. It intends to show how Blacks in the US and the Caribbean asserted their ancestral identities through the adoption of African names and the impact such naming practices had on African consciousness, and presents a Eurocentric dominated environment. Chapter 4, Discrimination, Stigmatization, and Researching African Ancestry. That's quote and close quote. Closely analyzes contemporary naming trends among Africans and some of the systemic and individual forms of racism and stigmatization that diasporic Africans encounter as a result of having African sounding name. Sorry, having an African sounding name. Further, it looks at additional issues that surface when diasporic Africans seek to research their genealogy, tracing his or her ancestral lineage to lineage and identity, and the physical and psychological difficulties persons of African descent face in such laborious and racially biased pursuits. Ultimately, the study seeks to shed light on African names and the naming practices and how these cultural elements have been impacted by European invasion, as well as the effects such would have on the African peoples at home and in the diaspora in terms of identity, memory, and their claim to genealogy. In this regard, the study looks at how African names and naming survived under the monstrosities of European domination, and as they came into contact with other cultures. In doing so, the project adopts qualitative methods with a reliance on some quantitative data gathering by other scholars in the field. It seeks to draw important connections between previous studies on the topic by refining the focus on the critical role of names and naming played in the oppression and liberation of slaves. It seeks to draw an important connection between previous studies on this topic by refining the focus on the critical roles names and naming played in the oppression and liberation of enslaved Africans, and how important African names are today to the psychology of Africans, as well as bringing about racial balance in Eurocentric societies.
So, Prof, as Neil reaches the end there, and remember what I said.
At the end?
Yeah, and there it is. Thank you so much, Neil. I mean, it's been a lot of mouthful, if to say.
I hear you there.
Yeah, no, Prof, what I was saying is that now that we have reached the end, and I know I was thanking Neil because I know it has been a big chunk for him to read all of that this afternoon and evening. And what I said about the whole question that her major was in psychology. And here it is in the very last line, the word psychology of Africans come up, which again ties back with what you're saying, that your PhD sometimes it's born from your undergrad that goes right on to live with you. But what I want to say then, because I know it was quite a bit, but you all have the document so you could always peruse it. But you're fortunate this evening to have Leslie with me. And if there's anything that you all want to ask her in terms of how she went about gathering her books and her material and what she did in terms of documenting, or Prof, how is it called when you keep records of your, there's a way that we call it in research, your log, when you keep a log so that on your record so that you'll always have it to put it on paper when the time comes, because you'll be on the field collecting stuff and then, Leslie, she's coming to join us, Prof.
But before she joins us, before she says anything,
yeah,
I suppose I got from the voice of Neil reading, and I hope I'm right, that he was lost. I got it from the tenor of his voice that he was lost when she began to talk about chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3 and chapter 4 in the literature review. And what she is doing is that, for those of you who are lost, I don't know if Neil, were you lost, Neil? I got a sense that you're kind of lost from where you're reading. Well, when she said chapter 1 and then chapter 2 will deal with this and chapter 3 will deal with that, and 4 will deal with that, etc. And I tell people, well, mostly when I'm doing dissertations, not masters, but when I'm doing dissertations, that what you do is that your literature review gives you a sense of what you have done or what it tells you to do. Your literature review tells you what you're supposed to do. It gives you a guide as to what these chapters will be, what the whole work is all about, what ultimately is your goal and your objective. So she put them in chapters like chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4 to tell you that having looked at this literature review, I can now summarize and say chapter 1 will tell me about so and so, chapter 2 will tell me about so and so, chapter 3 tells me about so and so, chapter 4 will tell me so and so. And she analyzes these things so the reader will get a better understanding of what is her plans, what is her aim, what's her objective, and how she intends to look at these things. So all what she's saying is that when you finish a literary review, it must tell you what has been done. It must say what this literary review tells me. What does it lead me to? What does it tell me about my theme? What does it tell me about my objectives? What does it tell me about the discourse, etc.? And so you write your literary review and you analyze it in terms of, you can write it in the chapters, but you're not bound to give chapters. You can just give a paragraph or two and say what this literary review leads me to. So don't get confused and say because she have chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. It could be for so many people just a chapter, or it could, for many people it could be just a paragraph telling me, having looked at the literature, it leads me to look at how I regard this literature and how it leads me to. For example, in the last line there, she said, in the last paragraph, she said, the project adopts a qualitative approach, etc. And I'm going to rely on A, B, C, D, E, F. In other words, she, instead of taking the 4 chapters, she could have written a paragraph or 2 paragraphs and say, having understood this literature, it leads me to do so and so, so and so. I hope I'm making sense. Are you saying with me?
Yes, sir.
And it leads me to this approach. It leads me to a qualitative approach, or it leads me to a quantitative approach, or it leads me to an ethnographic approach, or it leads me to look at so and so things. In other words, the literary review must lead you to something. You know, you don't leave a literary review in a vacuum, but it leads you to, it tells you what kind of approach I must adopt, what kind of methodology I must adopt, what kind of approach I must adopt in the methodology, or from here on. What does it tell me about my discourse? What does it tell me about my theme, etc.? In other words, why do you do a literature review? You do a literature review to guide you onto your research questions and to tell you exactly what must I do? What does the world discourse say? And therefore, what kind of approach I must adopt? Making sense? I hope I'm making sense. Anybody before we begin, let's tell any?
Yeah, it makes sense. It see what I seen why.
I ain't hearing you.
I say it makes sense. I see why it's very important for us get our review done.
All right then, beautiful. So Mr. Patrick, I leave you to Lizelle, welcome, and I leave you to them now to discuss that.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, Dr. Fitzpatrick.
Good night.
You can ask Lizelle any questions, I'm sure.
Right.
Who going first?
And don't be afraid to ask any questions.
So, Dr. Fitzpatrick, I am interested in the planning because I have to say the volume of the information you presented, it kind of frightened me, right? So the planning of how you, even from how you gather the data and then how you laid it out in terms of the excerpts you use from various texts, how was that process?
Well, as I just said, thank you, Neil. It is extensive work. The literature review, as Prof indicated, you're surveying the literary landscape of the topic of interest, and so conceptual. Well, for me, is first identifying what I wanted to write about, and as you know, my field is African and African American studies. How do I address an issue within the African diaspora community and African community. And one of the issues that we hear very often, right? I'm starting off with how I conceptualize my topic, because you have to connect to something that you're passionate about. The issue of disempowerment, right? And the disenfranchisement of African peoples. A lot of times you hear they talk around the physical violence of slavery, but how do we address the psychological trauma that persons of African descent would have endured from an African-centered perspective? And so I chose African naming and the significance of names within African cosmology, African society, African way of life. One of the quotes that I tend to often use is Audre Lorde's, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." Right? And one way to counteract, the culture of the oppressor is to embrace your own and to identify your own. Names, as I said, hold significant meaning for Africans. It's not just arbitrarily assigned. It is an invocation, a summoning of your spirit, your essence. So it contains your identity, your lineage. It was once said that had it not been first for slavery and the removal of African names, or the obliteration of African names by the colonizer, we would have been able to identify exactly which ethnic group, we came from. And so in terms of that, I had to look to see if there was any work that would have been done on naming directly or indirectly. And so I conducted my research, library research, Google research. One of the things that you have to pay attention to is the sources, right? They have to be reliable sources, not just something that was, written and thrown on Wikipedia. It has to, and I'm sure Prof would have told you all this, it has to be peer reviewed, gone through, rigorous study, as well as reviewed by scholars within the field in order to be considered a reputable source. And so all of these things you have to take into consideration. You'll know that if your topic does not exist, I know you'll discuss about the peripheral literature, right? That is out there. How do you use that, to build upon your work? So I thought that I would have answered your question. So it's just about, it is extensive, because you can't say that something does not exist if you have not done the research. It's very easy to say that, but then, if you have not done the research, it could very well be that someone would have done it, but you didn't do any research. You just assume that there's nothing out there. And so it took a lot of doing. Neil, I'm not hearing you.
Sorry. So now the layout for your writing, now when you start to put pen to paper, the planning for that, that step.
So it's a chronology, right? So I look at the introduction and the review as a roadmap, an indication as to how you're going to organize. So you do it in a sequence. You could either do it chronologically in terms of, in terms of time, or you do it thematically. And Prophets pointed that out, where books that were, similar in content, I grouped them together. And this is how I went about heading my chapters, and organizing. So I started off on the significance of names for Africans, right? And I'm introducing, why I am, why I chose names. in order to highlight.
That's thematic.
Yeah, in order to highlight the injustice that would have been done.
What about the eras?
Okay, so that would be before enslavement. A lot of times you get the narrative, the slave narrative, but Africans had a rich culture and do have a rich culture that predates the period of colonialism. And if we are saying that the masters too cannot dismantle the master's house, then we have to go back and fetch it. Okay, and then from there, after we would have established the significance and the importance of names and naming, I went into that period of colonialism and slavery and what was happening when Africans were violently, you know this, Neil, savagely uprooted, how they were dehumanized as chattel, as property, where within the European cosmos, you name things that you own. So you name a dog, you know, and that was a sign of ownership, but from the outside. But when Africans are bestowed a name, given a name, that power comes from within. It's what you respond to. So if somebody calls you fat and you respond to that, you know, so again, so I took the research there to show the deleterious impact that, you know, for instance, when a slave was bought, that enslaver gave that enslaved African a name. Now, if they were sold several times across the diaspora in the Caribbean, they were renamed and renamed and renamed because those who owned named. So I looked at that, but underneath that, Africans would have been, you know, using their traditions in order to counteract, you know, the impositions. So I examined that sort of, you know, the enslaved culture, because they were using, and I made reference to this in the piece that we worked on, is the whole, like for instance, how they were, and Prof speaks about that in his work as well. You know, the fact that they were given an adequate clothing, you know, how the Africans were able to make the scraps, the hand-me-downs, to make fashion. For African people, we love to look good. You know, that's a big part, you know, creativity is a part of who we are. You know, ingenuity,
that could also
music.
Lead to Miss Rose's thesis as well, that creativity.
You know, music. And even when we were giving ourselves European names, it was a creative thing, you know, the nicknames that they were giving each other. Also very African, although it's European sounding, some of the traditions in naming, you know, like naming a child after the grandmother or the grandfather. In the Igbo culture, a child who is believed to be the incarnation of the mother's father would be Namdi, and Namdi, which happens to be my nephew's name, as he was named in honor of my father. Now, these practices continued. Sometimes you go into a family and the grandmother might have been me. Hey, you don't find she look like me? And then that child happens to get either the first name or the middle name of, and that is very African. So the name might sound European, but the practice, the naming. So I looked at names and naming, and then I moved on to talk about what happened post-emancipation. So you're seeing the chronology. So you're seeing era there. So post-colonialism, post-slavery, no, pre-slavery, then that period of enslavement, and then what happened post-emancipation. Right, and right, so my name also, again, looking at my own family, because this is orthoethnographic work as well, meaning that my experience is incorporated in the study. Okay, and so my name happens to be of Zambian origin, and it means divine light. Now, my siblings, they were given they were named after my father and my mother. So my father was Leslie Sr., my brother Leslie, and my sister Leslie Ann, a combination of both. And then I got the African name. But again, that naming, very African. And what happens when we reclaim our identity through names, how we embody ourselves, because slavery sought to disembody the African spirit. But for Africans, we don't live by flesh alone. Everything is spirit, is music, is vibration. So again, how do we tap into our own culture and customs to heal?
I am hearing it.
To heal ourselves, our ancestral rituals that would have been dehumanized, not dehumanized, that too, but we would have been dehumanized, but our practices demonized. You know, it's all well and fine to dress like African, to tie your hair and all of that, but from the time you talk about spirituality, there's a pushback. You know, that's obi, that's necromancy. You know, but if we know our power, and that is the one thing that the slave master could not control. Right? They try to demobilize Africans by putting them in chains and bondage, but the spirit they could not contain. And so they impose these laws, right? These penal codes to prevent us from tapping into our practices. And so again, all of this to see that my topic is something that was very close and dear to me. And so I would have had that investment to do research. But if the research has no real connection to you, no meaning, you're not going to put the effort in. So you have to find something that really resonates with who you are. And then all the elements and all the advice that you get from Prof and Mommy, you know, you put that into the work. So you're not just writing for writing's sake, you're writing with a purpose. So I trust that this helps. And yeah, in organizing the paper, because there must be continuity throughout. You know, and one of the things I remember growing up with, you know, with my mom is that she would say, if I am reading your paper and midway through, I have to look up to see what your topic is, then you're off course, you know, and so you have to stay current with your own work throughout. You can't, if somebody is reading your work and by the second paragraph they're lost, that means you're not following, you know, there's no coherency, no cohesion or continuity of thought.
Let me just say, Lizelle, that they are not writing on Africans and naming methods, etc. But they are writing a literary review on different problems that they see to research for their masters. Probably what could you do is, if you could give them some tidbits about coming from your thesis, some tidbits to show them how they could arrange their literary review, like how you said in the beginning that it must first of all see what I'm about to do and how I'm planning to do it, etc. Things like that. If you could give them briefly some ideas of what you can gain from your thesis and how they can adapt in theirs. Probably the approach, because they're doing a different team, but the approach to writing their thesis, that might be what help them.
I mean, thank you for that, Prof. Does anyone want to share at least an idea of a topic?
Well, Leslie, good night. Well, I'm doing a musical and music in Carnival, but today what I got from your work was that, like, with my introduction, I put a lot of things that would seem that seem like it shouldn't be there, but now I understand that what I'm trying to say, I have to say it in the literary review, because, well, it's from books and it's from different authors' perspectives. So today would have, well, it helped me to know that I could slim down my introduction and take out things that would seem unnecessary, what I'm trying to say, and place it in the literature review.
And you can move some things from introduction and put in the literature review and what has been said.
Yeah.
Good. You can, in the introduction, you introduce the team, and you literally review, you can put down what has been said about your topic or relative things about your topic. Yeah.
And I'm happy that it did help, Adisa. But one of the things that I would ask you now is, you said you're interested in music and carnival, right?
Yeah.
And that is still is broad.
Yeah, it's really Zessa music. It's really, but that's the team, music and carnival, but it's really Zessa music I'm dealing with.
So Zessa music. So then you would have to define Zessa music and tell us what Zessa music is all about. And then you're talking about carnival. So again, in the context of carnival and music and carnival, you would have to give us some historical insight. Carnival, what carnival is, and how music evolved and emerged out of this tradition. Okay, so your introduction, Zessa music in carnival, you say what Zessa music in carnival is, right? You define what Zessa music is, and then within the context of carnival, and I'm assuming Trinidad's carnival.
Yeah. Yes.
We arrive, because I'm thinking Zessa music is something that is new.
Yes.
So in introduction, you'll have to define carnival, Trinidad and Tobago, carnival, define what music, define what is Zessa music, etc. And when you come to the literature review now, you have to see now what has been written about music and carnival, and what has been written about Zessa music, if any, in carnival. And if you find nothing, what has been written about music and carnival? What has been written?
And the evolution of music. Yeah. Okay, so as Prof said, so you start off with, okay, so that historiography, right? The roots of carnival music. And as if nothing was written about Zessa, you could see, okay, so we moved from Calypso, and then Calypso evolved, let's say, to soca, and then the different genre that would have evolved.
But importantly, then can I add that the carnival music was always associated with the culture then, the local people, the backyard music, the lower class. Carnival music evolved from that group of people, and Zessa might be another aspect of that sort of people belonging to that special group. That is the pulse of the carnival music there.
Yeah,
the steel band, the bottle and spoon, everything to make a rhythm of carnival music.
So, and are you saying that it is a derivative of carnival, of the carnival music aspect?
Is it rebellious music? Is it seeking Africanism? What is it that is making it a carnival music, or should belong to carnival?
And is it?
Yeah. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing. Fascinating topic. Anybody else?
I heard you talk about, by the way, Adisa, I was listening to a program last night and I heard you talk about Zessa. I said, the first time I heard you word, I said, now we're hearing about this Zessa. By the way, if I go off the topic, I don't want to go off the topic, but in case we don't want to talk about it, Mrs. Patrick, Miss Annette, I don't know if you read about, all of them read about the plagiarism that took place today. I hope you all, I don't know if you all stress it, if it brought it to the notice.
And how important it is not to do that.
You spoke about it?
Yes.
Oh, very good, very good. And the kind of shame that the world is bringing about on Trinidad in terms of plagiarism, you know. And when we talk about systems and we talk about citation, etc., it's all how badly it looks. And what is strange about it is that within her own party, the people in her own party told her that she's a plagiarist and that she was stealing. And that in some countries, in fact, in most universities, I told you, in most universities, when you are a plagiarist, you are expelled. There's some universities will expel you from university for plagiarism.
I remember that happened to Father Charles, who was the columnist in the papers, and then they found out that somebody wrote it up that he
looks so bad, and you can't defend it. And when she tried to defend it, she defended it by saying it's an administrative error. That is not an administrative error. That is theft.
But you know, Prof, if we are to understand the politics, remember, she doesn't really take charge of her party, and she allowed these young people to manage her platforms and her Facebook page, and to get back at the older folks to show how she has these loyalists. And these people don't know better, so they.
The effects of globalization today, you can't get away.
Because she's a lawyer, she should know, but she was not at war with it. So when she found out, it was too late because she can't say that young people put it.
Yeah, but she felt that but this man is an opposition man in London, and she's been opposition in Trinidad. She felt that, well, nobody would read that, nobody would get away, but not in this world of Twitter and Instagram. And
the buck stops here.
Facebook. You can't get away.
I think,
and when you do, the world condemns you.
I think what
condemns you
is saying that she's allowing too many of the inexperienced people to manage her affairs right now, and it is showing up even in the parliament, the nonsense that they're getting on with
and get away with sometimes.
So it's making her look bad.
This boy Naked got away with a lot of things and the agricultural man say, "What you get from you reading people things?" But I mean, they have followed up, but he come in there new and reading people things, and reading people work in parliament. I mean, you can't get away with these things. And I don't know how they reach there. I don't know how they reach there.
We vote for them, Prof. Now they reach there. We vote for them.
Parliamentary privileges, boy.
Parliament privilege, not that you get it.
And while I'm on my feet, please send me this week your topics, your themes. I can tell you some books to read. Send me the topic. I want to get the exact topics, the theme, what you're writing on. And when I get that theme, I can tell you some books that you can read for your literature review, because I'm finishing now all introductions. I'm finished all introductions now. I'm trying to mark all literature review. So send me, of course, I expect by now we have all sent you all the introductions. And I'm now concentrating on the literature review. So send me the themes of your introduction, and I can tell you what books you should have and and give you some ideas on your literature review, etc. Please send them to me so I can tell you when I know what you're writing on. I can tell you what books I know you should read, because I may have a little knowledge of some of the books, etc. You should read.
Okay, Prof. Well done.
Thank you, Prof.
Yes, sir.
I was telling Lizelle, I was telling your mother, I think I told her in a book that this boy Nehusi has written a lot on this topic. You should try and look at Nehusi's work. Kimani Nehusi, he's from Guyana.
Yeah, I'm familiar. Yeah.
Kimani Nehusi, my good friend, eh?
Yeah.
Prof, is it only in a comeback home or it's in other books he has written?
No, he has written a lot. He has written a lot, not just a comeback home. He has written a book on African naming practices also. He has written, and he's very good. And he's a very important person. I like him a lot because he has been looking at Egypt and Egypt and all the hieroglyphics, etc. And he's looking at African history from that point, you know. Very important. He's now at the University of Temple University.
Yeah, he's a temple.
Kimani Nehusi.
Thanks for that reference, bro.
Yeah.
Because I wrote this in 2012, so
Yeah, I know. That's why I to look at him. Look at his name. Kimani Nehusi. Kimanu. His name is Francis Drakes.
Francis Drake.
That tells you how he values names. His name is Francis Drakes. His mother named him Francis Drakes. And he got the sense to know who he was. He called himself Kimani Nehusi. Questions for Lizelle? Come on, anybody else before we close in? I see Miss Patrick looking at her watch.
Yeah, because I know we normally go up until 7, so I don't know.
Yes, we should finish half an hour ago. Alicia, any questions for Mrs. Patrick?
Yes, Mrs. Patrick. I am doing design in Carnival, and I'm mostly looking at the relationship. It's to my heart because I'm a fashion technical person. And what I want to really do is link fashion design in the Carnival. And there are 3 major areas I really would love to explore or investigate is the relationship in the creation of Peter Minshall masks, keeping focus on the river and how it has influenced Carnival. Also, the process of creating the mask and how he patterns or the relationship, how he patterns or communicate to the persons who helped him create the mask. So what I see is I'm reading in books, but the books mostly tells you about it in other areas, peripheral reading. Whereas in Trinidad, we really don't have anything that says such how he creates the mask. And that is one of the problems I'm kind of having when it comes into obtaining the right literature or the right types of books. There are lots of books on fashion and the processes that are done to create the garment or costumes, right? But we don't have anything really to say that is documented that how they create the mask. And the only way you can really do that is if you go to the personal, interview the persons who has had a relationship and how he relates to them in order to create the mask. So my question is, can you give me some idea of where to investigate or explore when it comes to such a topic? Because it hasn't been done. And I don't really have anybody in Trinidad who has explored the fashion and in the Carnival as a thesis topic.
Right. So I think you would have answered your question right there, right? So you said that you have the literature, right, on fashion and design.
Yes.
You really made that connection and the link, the centrality.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a field that you are intimately involved in. So you have that knowledge, okay? This is where you fill in the gap. So you review the literature that exists. You survey that landscape. And you identify elements that you can include in your work as reference. Then you show where now, you said that this informs your methodology as well.
Yeah.
You don't have there's no body of literature that deals specifically with your topic. Mm-hmm. So you now have to go out and speak, Prof. has the book from the horse's mouth. So you now have to collect that information. Mm-hmm. This is qualitative investigation here and gathering of information. Based on what you would have found, where now, how do you respond to your thesis? What does the information say about the design, the design element in Carnival. You're breaking ground. Because you said nobody did that analysis.
No.
And you look at what merit the other works would have, and what is lacking.
Okay.
And what is lacking seems to be your major theme, your thesis, your main point for doing this research is to make that link, that connection.
But can I just ask a question? I started to answer initially, Alicia, because they said Mr. Fitzpatrick, but I didn't realize it was Dr. Fitzpatrick. But
Dr. Fitzpatrick, sorry.
The thing about it is that in design, and I'm asking a question, in your design as a fashion design, are you saying that is the fashion design element that is absent in the costume design, or costume design that is lacking in the literature? Because I would imagine, based on what I'm seeing that you wrote, that there's something in costume design based on stage design, but it's the fashion design that there's no connection. So therefore I'm seeing two streams, am I right?
Yes.
And costume design.
Yes.
Then you want to see now how one influences the other. And
right. So, exactly.
Now, Lizelle, you did design as a minor as well. Is it the same design that Alicia had done, or is it a different kind of design?
I mean, design, but visual communication. But at the same
time. So that means like the visual impact and so forth, and the elements like texture, shape, and forms and so on, right? But I'm mostly looking at taking those elements and creating the mass. So therefore, for example, Peter Minshall, as you know, he's known for his mass, but he didn't create the mass, he designed the mass. And the persons who have designed the mass is the artisans behind that. And how did he relate his, for example, his drawings, and from the drawings, how the other person analyzed it. And once they analyzed it, what method or methodology was used to create the designs, and what are the different initiatives, inventive or experimentation that took place within that. And that kind of tell you how is it, because they have already documentations of that done in fashion abroad. But we don't have that even here as a local designers, like for example, mailing, and in which Peter has a very close influence when it comes to the fashion. Nothing has been documented, but what I have seen thus far is that how he patterns his design to relate to her. And slightly, I will investigate how she interprets his communication to relate to design and how it takes place. So that's what I'm really looking for when it comes to fashion in Carnival, and not so much the elements of fashion when it comes to color and design. That has already been done.
I think the distinction that you're making is between, I've articulated it, design, the techniques involved in designing, the process in designing, and mask making.
Yes. Right.
So mask making is the sewing and
right, and where it links, because in design also, when it comes to the technical creative part, there's sewing, right? And what I've also noticed also is the names that are carried through with this. For example, we'll have a couture or couturist, which is the high head or the head of a fashion house. So for example, the couturist is not the designer. And we'll have now in mass the prototypist. So the couturist is the one who will help have an organization to bring the mass design together, whereas the prototypist will also have the production to bring the mass together. So what are their similarities? And why are the names so different? And why it is that in certain international areas and aspects that a seamstress is more valuable than one that is here, right?
Now, stick up in a little bit. What I'm hearing from you, because you just said something that was very important. You say all of this has been done already. And that is where the literature review is taking you on all what has been done already. And if you match that with what Griselli's work is, she said, yes, these things have been done already, but this
But
done. So you just said all of those things had been done already, but you have an element of it. But what you're now talking to, you're leading us into your methodology. We're not getting there. Don't jump the gun.
no. Yeah, I know.
Let's stop at that point with that method, with that literature review.
Right.
Been done in the carnival and the dance, going back to the French balls and the couture and the this and the that and the African mask.
So you are saying that it has been done already, but not specific to Carnival. The design in Carnival.
Yes, right. But I think when I'm in my investigation, I see, for example, when you go to Camberley, right, and you see the reenactment, you see fashion in the design already because of clothes that was made and the materials. And so those are the elements and principles of design. But in the other hand, when you talk about the history, I think for Adisa, the imperial, I think it's the imperial history, so the imperial background. I really want to give a historical link from that time, you know, but not saying that I want to really, because when I'm thinking this, I'm thinking, okay, there's similar processes abroad, there's similar processes here. Is there a link? And how is that linked to? Right? And because it's new and I have no one to really guide when it comes to fashion and the costume, thus far, external, it's kind of difficult to say where my mind is going. So it confuses me a little bit. But I know exactly where I want to explore. I don't know where it's going to take me.
Let me stop it there, Ms. Rose. Obviously, I've been telling this already, and I've said it to this already. It means that your introduction has to be very, very important. You have to say exactly what your team is and what you're doing and what are your objectives in that introduction. Until you say that, then your methodology then wouldn't make sense. You have to exactly say what you mean by your team. I know what your team is yet, and exactly what it means. You have to say exactly that in your introduction. Say, whatever you say is law. You have to say what you're doing, what you mean by the designs, etc. What you mean by fashion design, what you mean by whatever it is, and then you go on to your literary to say what has been written on your team,
yes,
and what has not been written on your team, what has been written and what has not been written on your team, or any gaps, etc. But you have to say in that introduction, the reader must know exactly what you are looking at. Very important.
And the thing is, you already know, to add to what Prof is saying, you already know what you're looking for and you're not finding it.
Yeah.
You should be able to articulate that.
And that makes your work very significant because people have not written on your team.
Articulate that. And
what's that? You're breaking up. I'm not hearing you, Miss Dr. Fitzpatrick.
Introduction, very important. I'm looking for that. That introduction is so important. So important.
So I was saying that I don't know if you heard what I said before, but you
know, because you're breaking up.
Breaking up?
Not now. You're good now.
Okay, good. So you've been looking, you know what you want to write about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because your work is new, you're not going to find that topic because it's groundbreaking research that you're doing. Find work that would have been done that sort of speaks about principles of design, etc. And you're making the comparison that it exists elsewhere, but you're not seeing its presence
in Carnival.
And this is where Prof is saying you articulate that in your introduction because you are filling that gap. But it's not even a gap, you are breaking ground.
Yeah.
And you are adding now to the research. So somebody comes after you, okay, because the person who wrote the first book had to
yes,
break ground.
Yeah.
One of the things, Alyssa, if you don't mind, because I know we can always continue discussing with you because, you know, we're in touch. Jackie raised a point, and I would like to hear Rizali's take on it because her discipline right now is African cosmology and ontology. And Jackie raised the question. Do you still there with us, Jackie?
Yes, ma'am.
And you raised a question on the African spiritualism, and if you can remember exactly what was your analogy to the Bible and whatever holy books that you mentioned. I don't know if I was able to articulate or to respond the way that Lizelle probably can, since this is now her discipline. So ask the question.
Oh, I was saying that there is spirituality. Spirituality is a topic that has been explored, period. But spirituality in carnival and the Africans' traditions that they have speaks to specific times when you can call up the spirit or when you can dismiss the spirit and you don't get the spirit up and not send it back and not dismiss it. That sort of thing has never been written. But they talk about spirituality, the Christians talk about it, the Muslims, the Hindus, everybody talk about spirituality. But when we come to looking at what the African looks at as spirituality, it's much more. And they can specifically pull spiritual beings or be in contact with spiritual beings, but only at particular times.
Write that in your introduction. Write that in your introduction. That is, you have to write that. You have to make that statement. You have to explain them.
And having done that now, having called them up, then you must dismiss them. If you leave them here, they stay with you. And that is the problem I'm having in Trinidad Carnival. In terms of every 2 minutes, they shut it down at a certain time. They have it. I remember when I was a child, Juve started at 3 a.m. I didn't know why. Because I remember specifically after the march guy, a Lyman tongue for a little hour, and that was Juve after that. It don't happen so. Juve now is like when they clean 5 o'clock, all kind of thing. That is no time for Juve. Because Juve, there's a significance with Juve. You're calling the spirits to help you. That sort of thing with respect to the carnival. And that is what I am fighting to get written.
Very good, very good. Whatever you say or whatever Alicia Rose say, that is the law. Write that in your introduction. Introduce that topic. Whatever you say is the law. Whatever you say is the written truth. That is what you're doing.
Very well, sir.
Write that in your introduction. Unless you write a good introduction, then you when you write a good introduction, nobody can say you're doing anything. Whatever they say is different from what you write, then they're doing nonsense. You write what you mean.
Yeah.
Introduction must introduce your topic and how you see it. What are your objectives? What you're trying to do? That's your introduction.
And go so many places with that.
How you see the world, how you see your topic is what is it? How you see your topic, that is it.
So Jackie, does that answer what you had asked me before with the Bible reference and some other holy book? I can't remember exactly. Did it answer?
Yes, because in the Bible references, there are certain things in the Bible that don't mean anything to people because they don't think about the time. But if you could recall, Jesus went to the cross at a certain time. He gave up the ghost at a certain time. And people will talk about the wider thing about this biblical sort of teaching, but they're not seeing the time. And I am saying that in spirituality, at least spirituality in carnival, there are specific times to do specific things. There are times. And nobody has ever written on that, on the specific times. As a matter of fact, now they haven't carnival any time and they don't even end it. They will shut off carnival now at 7 o'clock because they talk about crime. Crime is for the police to deal with. The festival is for the spirit to deal with. You can't put crime with spirit.
Write that. That's your introduction.
The police must wait until 12 o'clock to end the carnival, or else They remain with crime because spirits continue to live with us and they're not seeing it that way. And that's how I seen it. I'm seeing we are creating, we are getting this society creating their own demise because of the festival and because of what happens in the festival. And nobody seems to realize, why could a man dance whole day and then get tired, walk for miles and then get tired? And if you want to walk by the corner, you jump in your car on a normal day. And nobody understands now you're walking alone. It's spirits like telling with you. So that's what's happening. So when you bring all these spirits here and they become one with you and you don't dismiss them, then they live with you. And then you want to know why you have all that crime.
Your team in research is conflicting until you write it.
Very well, sir.
All your assumptions will be conflicting until you write what you mean, what you want to write.
Very well.
Different people will see all different ways of your team. They will see all different things. When you state what you're looking at, that is your business, and that's your team.
Very well.
I think we covered everybody now. Anybody missing? Dwayne was there earlier on, but I don't know when he is now.
Dwayne has left. Let me use the opportunity to thank Lizelle. Thanks a lot for your work, etc. We are using your work to look at literature review. It's the most challenging part of I have found in the classes. The easiest part I have found is the introduction, and yet people get problems because introduction is what you see. What is your topic? Nobody can tell you what's your topic. Nobody can tell you what's your problem. Problem is very problematic in the sense that it's a misnomer. The problem is how you see the problem. You write the problem, and then your literature review is based upon what has been written. And if you find nothing has been written, you look for all the peripheral things surrounding your topic to write about. That's all in your literature review, all the peripheral things. But I want to thank you very much for coming and let them see how it is. It's difficult, but one of the things I've gotten from your literature review that I've told about is in the beginning you state it's an essay and you state what you plan to write about, how you plan to write this literature review, what it must say, what you're looking at, and at the ending of it all you must say, what has this literature review given to you? What have you gained? And what you have gained, one, and how does it help you to direct your methodology, and how it can help you to direct your objectives, etc., and your studies, and what you're going to do. That your literature review will lead you into your research methods, into your methodology, and your research questions or your hypotheses, etc. And whatever you write for your introduction is going to impact on your literature review. So introduction is most important. That's the basis. Very important. Whatever you believe design is, that's your topic. No design, that's your topic. Whatever you want to write, whatever you say, it is you doing the research, not nobody else. You doing the research and you have an idea, and it's your problem. That because everybody, your problem could go into 1,000 problems. You have to say, this is my problem, and this is what I'm researching. That's all. That's all. That's why they have so many people doing dissertations and theses, and one topic will have hundreds of dissertations, one topic, because different people see that topic differently. You have to say what I am doing. Very, very important.
And one of the things that the students didn't realize is in citation, so it was an eye-opener for some of them, not all of them.
Yes, yeah. So I'm glad for this, because the writing literature review is a problem for many students. Not only for master students, especially for dissertation students. When you're writing dissertation, because so little has been written on our carnival, and so little has been written on our culture and African culture, so little has been written, and you have to gather all these sources. And what the problem I'm getting, and I'm trying to get them away from, is the reviewing books and not the content. You have to look for the content of what has been said that you're reviewing. And not to look at literature not only in books, but look for that literature all about the places. And after you look at the literature, you can give a critique of the literature in terms of what has been said, what has not been said, and what should be said, etc. Because that will help to guide you. And you can use your literature review in such a way that after you use literature review, it will help you to come as part of your methodology and all. So you can analyze your literature review afterwards as part of your methodology. You know, very, very important. You don't give away too much things in your literature review sometimes because you want to hold things for your methodology and for your findings. And many people give away everything in the literature review and they have nothing for their findings afterwards. See? So you have to know, you have to just say simply what has been written. And then when you come to methodology and your findings, now you analyze that literature review to lead to your findings.
That is what you call the secondary sources of data.
Secondary sources and secondary analysis. Secondary analysis is a method. It's a method of research. So what I want all the folks to do is write your introduction. What are you doing? What is your theme? Secondly, write your literature review. What has been written on my topic? What has not been written on my topic? What has not been written? And then let me give you, and what has been missing? And then I'll go on now, that will lead me on to my research questions, etc. So that at the end of it all, when somebody comes to criticize your work, or the supervisor comes to criticize your work, he cannot criticize you, he criticizes your work based on your introduction, what I am doing. You can't criticize me on what I didn't set out to do. You can only criticize me on what I set out to do, and not what I didn't set out to do. Very important. I want to thank you very, very much, Lizzie. I want to thank Miss Annette.
Thank you, Dr. Fitzpatrick. Thank you, Mrs.
And I'm glad you raised the point. I'm glad you raised the point to them, Mrs. Patrick, about plagiarism. Because that has gone all over the world. It has gone all over the world. All in London, people are talking about that piece of plagiarism we have today, where people have taken the work of the leader of the opposition in England to praise Biden. But once you praise Biden, once you say something about Biden, whatever you write, you see, they don't understand. Whatever you write about Biden goes all over the whole world. And the whole world sees what you have written. And when the whole world sees what you have written, you can't afford to plagiarize anybody's work. You can't afford. And when you write, when you plagiarize people's work, it goes to the whole world. That is why universities are saying, if you plagiarize some people's work, or you write out citations, you are dismissed. They throw you out. And especially if you're doing a dissertation, you can't afford to have poor citations and wrong citations, or worse, you can't plagiarize anybody's work. So therefore, what you feel is design, write that. What you feel is spirituality, you write that. That is yours. Nobody can plagiarize your mind. You write that. What you feel is masculinity, you write that. And what you feel is just as music in carnival, you write that. That is yours. Nobody can plagiarize that.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mrs. Fitzpatrick and Dr. Fitzpatrick.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Fitzpatrick and Dr. Fitzpatrick.
One thing, Neil, who read all evening, he did not, well, I think he was the one who asked first, right? So I hope he's okay now.
Yeah, well, I hope Neil, I have confidence in Neil. I hope he'll come up with his work and see what he's doing.
Gosh, see that, yeah. Professor, you must have confidence in me. No, that, all right, I'm going with that, Professor. I'm taking that. I'm taking that.
Well, I have confidence in you because of your experiences, you know.
Masculinity, Prof?
You may not be masculinity and the carnival. You may not be able to write well, but he'll be very, very, whatever his team will be very personally, but he'll be filled with experience. You know. It will be very original.
I feel like I backhand slap this on this. I feel like I start off good. That's all like it went sideways.
Do some of your paper. I didn't get your paper in the college. I'll get it because I couldn't. As I told you, I couldn't correct it. I don't know why.
I don't know why, sir, because I sent it as a Word document.
Yeah, well, every time I press my what do you call this? This little mouse, yeah. The whole thing going down, it going to the end. I said, I don't know. I probably had something at the bottom of the paper. I don't know. I don't know.
I always get blamed. You know. So I left the printed copy for you, sir, at John Donaldson.
Sunday, I'll get tomorrow. Tomorrow is Tuesday. I took tomorrow Wednesday. I'll pass there. But I usually pass there every day. I spend an hour or two every day.
Okay, and is it possible, sir, that we could send some type of letter to the international press distancing ourselves from Ms. Bissessa?
That'd be a very, very good thing to do. By this, I hate you, but that's a good thing to do.
Joshi under the whole bus.
Yeah. I told you about Father Charles already. Father Charles
Yes.
Father Charles was pulled up for the same thing. Catholic priest. Yeah. I was pulled up one time. I wrote something on the press. I didn't give any citations, and they asked me to give me a citation. I don't give citations because at that time, at that level, because nobody reads it. But when you write in an academic work, you have to have citations. You know? If I write a letter to the press or something, I wouldn't give. But if when you write an academic work, you have to give citations. You have to say where you get it from. You have to quote properly.
Well, I feel we should release Christian now. Christian, I think you Christian again over time, boy.
Christian is there? I forgot Christian, yes. Christian, thank you very much.
Close us off in prayer as usual.
I forgot Christian.
Yeah, thank you, Christian.
Yeah, Christian.
God bless you all. We give you thanks, Almighty God, for all thy benefits to live and in this world.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everybody. Christian, everybody.
Modu. Bye.
I ain't seen Christian.
Thank God.
We chatted him yesterday.
Talking
You must be tired from yesterday. He had a show yesterday. You must be tired.
Christian, tell Prof you're here still.
Yeah, man, I'm here. I'm holding up.
By the way, Mrs. Patrick, I'm getting so much thing on my article from yesterday. I didn't know the article read so much. I'm getting tomorrow I have to go and talk to Tobago. Tobago is calling me. Special program on Radio Tambourine tomorrow, Mrs. Patrick, to discuss the article. Wow.
Very, very good.
They want to come at 7 o'clock in the morning. I said 7 o'clock, I still sleeping. All kind of people come. Reginald Dumas wants to have a discussion with me, all kind of things. Everybody. The minister is meeting with us tomorrow also. But I told her I can't come because of the class tomorrow. I can't come. She wants to meet us at 4 o'clock in the evening, but I can't come because I have this class tomorrow evening.
Right. Right.
All right. God bless.
Yeah. Yes.
Bye.